Hello and welcome to At the 55, your home for USports football. Me and Tom are back on the mics after an electric week 3, week 2, depending on which conference you're following, of USports action. We're going to start with our players of the week, dive into the OUA action, take you around the league with USports, hit up a little mailbag action, and so much more. But first, Tom, how the heck you doing, my friend?
Oh, I'm doing so well, my man. The trend of great football has just continued on for these past 3 weeks. It really feels like 2025 is the year of the offense with all of the outstanding showcases that we've seen so far, not just in the OUA, but across the league. And I, for one, and I think you and I both, as former offensive players, as offensive linemen, love to see an offensive showcase.
Absolutely. And I mean, this is one of the few weeks this year. Obviously, we've been doing slightly adding more of that U Sports coverage into our every week, our weekly podcasts. But I'm just excited to talk about some of those other conference games as I am for what we had in the OUA. At time of recording, hey, respect to Laval Sherbrooke. That game hasn't happened. I think we'll be all right to go through it without it. That wasn't a game that either of us were highlighting going into the week. I think we'll manage just fine without it for our review. But we're going to start with the OUA Players of the Week. Start on the offensive side of the ball. Or sorry, normally start on the special teams side of the ball. Let's start there. Tom, special teams player of the week. You were in that house for this young man's performance. We've seen so many great special teams performances by this young man. Who's it going to?
I mean, it goes to a guy who had something to say to us when we first came out with the top 55 list, saying that we had him a little bit too low. And you and I were thinking, okay, yeah, like maybe, but like, from what we saw, whatever. Every single time he touches the ball, you and I text each other going, yeah, we had him way too low on our 55 list. It has to go to Tayshaun Jackson with that electric punt return for a touchdown. I watched it happen. Obviously, I was live in person for this game. The ball goes on the ground. He fumbles around with it a little bit, constantly looking up, makes a few guys miss, gets to the first line, and is gone. He is one of, if not the most electric players when he's got his hands on the ball. At any given point, he could score.
And what he did, just taking those handoffs as well, was amazing. That'll be the first game we dive into. And so excited to get your takes being there on the sideline as the whole world saw on Leomi's touchdown and you with the hard fist pump. That made my week. Tom, let's go to the defensive side of the ball. Gosh, I know we talked about it, but what a great surprise for me too, because I'm forgetting who we agreed upon we were going to with this one. Tom, defensive player of the week. Tell us all, where are we going with this one?
Well,
Oh,
when you think about a team that needed a rebound and needed a lot of just extra help from wherever they could get it and had a ton of question marks on that defense, you think about a guy who completely came back and helped his team out. It has to go to number 43, Xavier Malone, linebacker for the Carleton Ravens. He finishes with 8 tackles and 3 sacks. With all the things that were happening with Ravens football and especially question marks around that defense, and if are they going to average giving up 500 yards per game? Him coming through and being the leading tackler and leading sack leader for this Carleton Ravens squad was such a huge step forward for where we think this Ravens program should be. So he's got to get our defensive player of the week.
and question marks, though there were about the defense, he, along with a number of other players, were some of the things that we were very much looking forward to relying upon. And him, along with some of the other guys still in there, Chris Dupin, L. James Igamudo, Jake Henderson, are going to be needing to rely on that much more because of, golly, that brutal injury to Schneider, K. Phillip. But we'll get into that one in a few. Let's finish off on the offensive side of the ball. I mean, it's to no one's surprise turning into a trend that a starting running back from Western's putting up these numbers. So, Tom, take us through the day that young Mr. Ethan Dolby had.
I will absolutely get to that, but I just wanted to give a quick little shout out before we get into Ethan Dolby. I mean, he probably could have been 3-time player of the week if his teams had actually won, but what Scott Barnett is doing with the UofT offense is truly unbelievable. I mean, he finishes 39 for 55, 468 yards, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions, and probably could have had a bunch more if not for a few untimely drops by some of his receivers as well, including that game winner that would have been. But we like to have a little trend where if you win the game, then you get to be a player of the game, and it's got to go to Ethan Dolby. 13 attempts, 182 on the ground, and 3 touchdowns. This is a standard Western rushing attack, sure, but man, Ethan Dolby looks amazing right now.
And that's a game in Ottawa and Western that, we're messaging each other towards the end of that one, and me being like, I don't care about the score. I am still impressed with Ottawa. And in specific, we've been seeing over the last couple of weeks how good that D line's been for them. And early on in this game, with Hildebrandt, with Prince, and obviously those great linebackers, they were limiting Western a little bit, but golly, it didn't take long for the floodgates to open up. That second quarter trend of Western's putting up 28 is, golly, it's only a 2 week trend. So, I mean, if it continues any further than that, this is a very scary team. Those are players of the week. Tom, let's dive into the action, starting with a Friday night affair from Richardson Stadium in Kingston, Ontario, that you were in the house for, where the Queen's Golden Gales hosted the reigning Yates Cup champions and fell short in an electric matchup. Final score, Laurier 47, Queens 32. Tom, I don't want to set up too much because I want you to take us through what it was like being there. It seemed like the fans obviously getting the first home game of them being live and direct, opening the season against Western, as to the chagrin of some of the Queens folks that reached out to us. How do you have that matchup with no fans? Queens looks impressive in that loss. They look great on the road. And this was a matchup going into it that we were so excited by how evenly matched these two clubs were. But just take us through being there at Richardson on a Friday evening with I don't know if it didn't seem like full house, but a really strong crowd for what was a top 5 matchup in USports. And this is where we're going to save our top 10 conversation for, when the top 10 list comes out on our preview pod. By my money, still a top 5 matchup. I don't care about that Queens record. Both these teams are stellar, but take us through the experience of your being there.
Yeah, first and foremost, an electric atmosphere. Richardson Stadium with a packed house is one of the best football cultures of football places you could be in. I really believe that. One thing that I want to say, and it's not just specifically to Queens, but to all of our young first-year fans who are coming out there, and I think the university should probably put something out here too. Can we please just get a little bit more knowledge around when your team has the ball to be as quiet as possible, and when your team doesn't have the ball to be as loud as possible? I can't tell you the number of times that Queens is in the red zone trying to score on Laurier, and the Queens fans are so excited they start yelling and chanting and cheering. And you see all the Queens players on the sidelines being like, guys, you got to calm down. Like, we're trying to make calls here. So I would love if on those Jumbotrons right before the game starts, especially in those first week or the week openers when you get all the first years in there, just a quick little PSA, be quiet when we're on offense and go nuts when we're on defense. But it was still fantastic to see that. And just to speak to the atmosphere of it, I believe it was in the third quarter, the fourth quarter, when Queens is attempting to make that comeback and getting closer. They get a touchdown in one of the end zones. And I guess somebody had handed out a bunch of those snap like glow sticks.
Uh-oh.
And they get thrown onto the field. It was like confetti all across. Must have been a nightmare to clean up, but it was electric to be on the field. I think I was a target for some of the kids because they seemed to be throwing stuff at me even after the touchdown was done. But it was awesome to see that. A lot of things that I love seeing here, and seeing great teams like we have in the past, and now getting a sense to see here's trends of championship caliber teams and what happens here. Both of these squads, obviously amazing, top 5 matchup, but you can see when Queens makes a mistake or when a Laurier gets an opportunity, they capitalize, and it's immediately down, either flipping the field or scoring a touchdown. That's the same level of competitiveness and greatness that we have seen from those Western teams, Laval teams, and all of those championship caliber teams, where the moment that you have a chance, they score or they do something with it. That's where I've seen this Laurier squad in, and that's why I'm so convinced that they are a Yates Cup contender for the second year in a row. Queens, when they're clicking on all cylinders, they can compete with any team in the country. I am completely sure of that. The issue right now for them is consistency. You see an Alex Vreeken when he's back there and he's on his game, he's throwing the ball. The touch that he has is incredible. And then there's other times where, whether he's rushed or whether he's trying to fight off whatever it is, and he throws the ball and it's off the mark. It's either in the dirt or it's so. And I don't want to just pick on Alex Vreekin because there's a whole bunch of examples like that you could see across the board, but consistency is what I want to see from this Queens team because, like I said, when they're at the top, when they're at their peak, they can compete with anybody.
I agree. Here's to me why I think our tiers, and I think maybe it'd be fun when we get to the halfway part of the season and we'll do our U Sports review as well across the board to maybe reevaluate our tiers going into the season. And as far as Queens and Laurier Western and all that, having now seen what those top four teams all play each other, save for Queens playing Guelph and Laurier playing Western, but for the B tier teams to get their shot against those teams that as we went into it, just saying like, well, I mean, it's not a hot take. We're just separating you based on the fact that two of these teams have actually won Yates Cups this decade. The other two have been in pursuit of them, looking really good all the while. This game reminded me a lot of Laurier Guelph last year. And and in many ways, it kind of reminded me of the Laurier Guelph game earlier this year. And even though that Western game for Guelph the week before was super frustrating, the injuries, all these things, was that part of what I think separates those teams that are able to get to that mountaintop, whether they plant the flag or not every year, is that when you're in a matchup against a team that can beat you, are you going to be the one getting those, I don't know what you want to call them, but just explosive plays? And the same way that Tayshaun Jackson in that Guelph game a year back has that incredible kick return touchdown. We see obviously his contributions here beyond what he does on the ground, but getting that immaculate, what was it, 90, was it 99 on the return? Right shy of 100 on the on it. Then you add in Paul Legale getting the pick six for them as well. And it just has that feeling of those are those plays that, and obviously Queens has the guys to be able to make those plays. When we get to the Guelph conversation, though, against a lesser opponent by relative standing to who they've played so far in Windsor compared to Laurier and Western, we finally see Guelph get a couple of those like big plays where it's like, thank you. Like, and that's a weird thing to kind of judge because I don't really know where that comes from, but it just seems to be the fact that the teams that do get to the top are buttoned up. They're on their P's and Q's. A couple penalties by Laurier early in this one, and actually similar with Western that kept the respective opponent in the game perhaps a bit longer. But that's the thing for me where it's just whatever that is, like whether it's just the fact that the other team knows they have to be so perfect that sometimes it leads to giving something up big because maybe they're a bit too tight and you get to have that looseness. That's where, to me, I come out of this game still saying, and I think I said it's still a top five matchup. I think my math, I did bump Queens outside the top five, but certainly a top 10 team in U Sports, undoubtedly, because as you said, I'll take them darn near against any team in the U Sport across U Sports. But it's those explosive plays that it seems to just be that these teams that end up at the top are making, and Queens, pardon me, and Laurier had, amongst a ton of great plays, those two ones that stand out with the Legale pick six, and then of course the Tayshaun Jackson one, that this seemed to be what separate those teams that make it and those who are still in pursuit of it.
Yeah, previous podcasts, we used to call those like the jump ball moments that we had, and just that
Yeah.
like idea of there's a moment in every game, at least once. A lot of games have multiple of them where momentum can swing in either direction depending on what happens here, and the great teams are consistently able to take advantage of that. Whether that means something like a fumble happens and who's able to knock the ball out of bounds in order to get the first down or get possession of it, or whatever that the case may be. And you're exactly right, and that's exactly what Laurier has been doing and what Western has done previously in Laval and all of these championship caliber teams. And you can see flashes of that. I know I just said this, but I just really want to reiterate the fact that you can see flashes from Queens. You see an Oliver Jackson rushing off the edge. You see a Justin Pace, how well he can tackle and how well he can play. You see a Jared Kasari. And man, let me tell you, I know you and I have been big fans and we've seen him before, but something about being on the field and watching Kasari hit a gap and hit a hole and burst. Like I saw that his long of 19 yards, I was like right in front of it essentially as that happened. It was a beautiful thing to see him hand off the ball, make a cut to get into the proper gap and then explode out, make contact and fall forward. Oh, it was fantastic to be able to see that.
Well, and I love that you brought that up because you look at Kasari's day on the whole, 8 carries for 74 yards, the long of 19 as you were highlighting. And and I'll hold on to that thought because I just want to go over like Queens' day, and we'll talk about Laurier more specifically. But just to frame it like this, to throw it back at you, Tom, of saying like Vrakin goes 30 for 49, 396, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception, and a major interception, as we just highlighted. It comes back all the way for 6. Kasari, 8 carries for 74 yards. You probably like to get a few more of those carries, but also Queens is kind of playing from behind in a lot of this. Ethan Dahl only gets the 2 carries, doesn't put in too much there. Vrakin, you get an extra 37 from. But Cedric Smith has a great day, 8 receptions, 93 yards. Ashby Jacobs, as we've seen, really play strong this year. He gets the touchdown. Preston Martin, Nathan Falcone, who we've really liked, Matteo Tuioti. And just across the board, and Tyler Mullen misses a field goal, but beyond that, looking really sharp in all his duties that he takes on for this team. If you're being realistic, it's like, and you add in a fumble by Matt Camillo as well, which obviously, so as far as those plays that, are, credit to the other team, and you say a little bit of like, gosh, we got to be a little more sound on that. If you're being realistic, going up against Laurier, if I was going to tell you that this is the day, the output you get from Queens, you're not going to be upset about it by any means whatsoever against a top-ranked team, arguably the best team in the country, one of the best defenses they have. And so, yeah, it comes down to those jump ball plays, and it comes down to the fact I'll let you if you want to comment on that part in specific, but to flip it over of saying, Laurier, yeah, a couple plays early on that, maybe kept it a bit close, a couple uncharacteristic penalties here and there. But the Lauriers and Westerns of the world aren't going to be making those mistakes, and are not only rarely going to make those mistakes, they know how to capitalize big time on the ones that you make. Again, when we go into that Western Ottawa game, there was a period there where it was just like either a poor decision or a decision that led to a poor outcome for Ottawa, and boom, Western's right there to capitalize it. Because as much as I love the day that Queens put together offensively, and we'll talk about what they did defensively with, obviously that McManus defense that we love so much, but Laurier is there step for step and then capitalizing. But it was just a battle of two great teams, one of whom is just that much better right now, and it shows in those moments that could be mitigated, could be controlled, but are blown up into something bigger by one of the best teams we have going right now.
Yeah, and it's one of those where it can be very easy to just go into every podcast being like, oh, Laurier's so awesome, and Western's so awesome, and their offenses and whatever else. But when you actually watch this and you understand the game, when you see an Ethan Jordan catching the ball and going for a touchdown, you go, well, yeah, we've seen that before. But what you don't realize is that he's outrunning Ian St. Arnaud, who was one of the fastest dudes on the field and had 3 or 4 touchdowns, like 109-yard touchdown returns last year. So obviously he's pretty fast. And to see him outrun that is unbelievable. To see Quentin Scott go for 115 on the ground, and to see Tayshaun Jackson, who has the best twitch I've ever seen, to see him juke Justin Pace. It was unbelievable to see all of the pieces from this, and to see an offensive line that is steadily getting better and better. Had a couple of weak moments here as I heard Coach Scotto in person, making sure that the boys got fired up, which was nice. But you can see the entire offense, even though they've put up 47 points, well, 47 as a team, whatever, you can see this offense getting better and better and better as things go by. And I spoke with Coach Galloway after the game and saying, each game so far has been different versions. We saw the double tight set. I didn't see much of that in this game. We saw the sprint out, or the wide receiver screens, and then you're seeing them push the ball a little bit further down the field. You're seeing a more emphasis on the run game. And even I saw him after the game, and he's got the shit-eating grin on his face like he typically does. And he goes, I can't believe McManus is doing a cover 6 against me, thinking that I won't run the ball because I'm going to get too impatient. I mean, he's absolutely right, but I have Coach Scotto here, and he's going to force me to run the ball, and that's what we're going to do here. We got to get him out of that. But this is just a team and a chemistry that seems to get better and better and better as things go. I mean, saw a Queens defense like Ashton Miller Melanson, and he's making great plays. Like you think a receiver is open and he's not. If Ashton is covering him, I promise you he's not open. And then Keegan Vanek, and you see Justin Pace obviously doing all those great things. And despite all of the greatness that is that Queens defense, you still see production on that Laurier offense. And that's really where the impressive side of things are. It's one thing to just consistently do this, but when you're doing it against the caliber of team, that's what people need to understand why this Laurier team is so great.
Well, and early on, you that Queens D line was looking
Mm.
so good, causing problems all across the board. And we keep calling out his name, which probably is gonna lead to this guy, vying for an OUA All-Star bid at this point. But like what Oliver Jackson in the middle and at the end position, just wherever they're lining him up, along with Eric Johnston, Stephen Capay as that sort of reliable core of that front line, then to be able to have, again, we know who was behind all those guys. But early on, so reliably getting back there, making Cal uncomfortable, making some of those tackles for losses until eventually it kind of, there's only so long you can hold a team like this down. And you have to rely on the fact that even when you have a great defense, maybe you get those big plays here and there. And, across the board, it seemed like Laurier was relatively spotless, if you will, in terms of making any major mistakes. You get some penalties here and there, but they just played their game. Whereas on the flip side, Queens makes a few of those, just few mistakes here and there that typically you can probably live with in a lot of games, not against this one. Let's talk about the day that Cal Wither had, and kind of by extension, the season he's having so far. Because I think this is where, this is going to be, we're going to have to, I don't know if there's receipts per se, but there's definitely a lot of folks, even when it was known that Cal Wither and knowing who he was, where he was coming from, his kind of history and all these types of things, was coming in here where people were still like, how are people talking about Laurier as highly as we were when you lose Taylor, right? And again, it makes all the sense in the world. Guy goes off to the highest level, the highest league of all football, right? It makes sense. And what we're seeing consistently from Cal, and I should have pulled up his season stats on the whole. Maybe I can grab it here in a second. But on this day, 18 for 26, 244, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception. And without having his averages across those 3 games, I'm willing to say that's pretty well par for the course for him.
Mm-hmm.
That he's had, and last week we know he had the 2 interceptions, and we said that realistically he probably should come out of that Windsor game with 1, not the 2, because of how things broke out and everything. That first week against Guelph, really efficient. And the whole piece was, as I think you were really saying, I think we were both saying, is that you don't need, with how good this cast of characters are around whoever's at quarterback, you don't need an A++ guy on top of the fact that you have one of the best guys calling them up and Coach Stones Galloway. So to me, I think this is going to be pretty consistently what we see from him. He'll probably, Laurier, despite the 3-0 record, this has been, a hard start to the season. Windsor, again, we're starting to get a sense of who they are, but we like a lot of guys on that defense at least. Save for maybe a couple games against the teams that are really truly a cut below where Laurier's at, I feel like there's going to be Cal's numbers. And just to kind of put this out there, though, because my understanding, and this is coming from you, so you can correct me here, is that Cal's eligibility situation at Laurier is pretty nice in the grand scheme of things. I could see this being a thing where he rides out this year with numbers looking pretty consistently like this, that 18 for 26. That could be Josh Jansen in there. That could be Evan Hillock. That could be so many of these guys. Tristan Aboud. These are just, we're yet to really see, I feel like, one quarterback really rise above the rest. I guess that's Scott Barnett, really.
Yeah.
But save that point. I say all that to say, I could then see next year when maybe some of these pieces around him aren't there, where arguably maybe his numbers become that much better, when now it's like, okay, you worked in the system when everything around you was darn near perfect and we needed you to just execute for that. And I feel like we'll probably get some previews of it this year, and we've seen him make great passes around all 3 of these games and whatnot, but there's still that epically great quarterback, I think, waiting in him. We'll see it in spurts. I feel like it's waiting to come down the line when all of a sudden it's like, all right, you don't have the full cast of whomever around you, your superheroes there, and now you have to be the superhero. And I think he has that in him too. Because these games, again, I think it's like that's a great average. I see there being that much more in him when the time calls for it.
Yeah, I certainly think so as well. I think exactly like you mentioned with Stones, Galloway calling up the plays and having so many different weapons, it allows you to have a slower day and still be fine. And like we've said before, Coach Falls goes into this being like, as long as we have somebody who can be a solid facilitator, I think this year can still be really solid. And right now, that's what he is doing. And I think exactly like you mentioned, there is space for him to explode out and to be that all-star that we expect him to kind of be here. But like, you get down into the red zone, you're like, okay, we got to worry about Ethan Jordan, Jace Atkinson, Ryan Hughes, Jackson Stebbings, maybe Ryan Spade. Oh yeah, Leomi Ojatalayo on a corner route wide open in the end zone, which is where you see me celebrating or just seeing him going off there. But like, there is no area for you to just say, okay, we're going to double cover this guy and then we're set here. There's so many weapons and there's so many things that he's able to do. And then also in that same vein, the play calling that's there and saying, okay, we're going to do just a quick crosser route, get Ethan Jordan the ball with some space, and then boom, you see him take off for 81 yards and a touchdown. So there's so many different avenues here to allow him to get more accustomed to the Canadian game and or to do whatever else kind of needs to. And eventually, and I'm sure it's going to come out in the championship caliber, whether it's in the playoffs or in a conference championship, you'll see him start to sprout more and more in that setting here as well.
And I did just go through it. I mean, he's 17th in all of USports in yards per game, 10th in his percentage. He's tied for second with the 7 touchdowns, which kind of makes sense that, as you're saying, the red zone efficiency is going to be there. The fact that, EJ is, I don't want to say gifted him 2 touchdowns, but when you've had two times where it's just like, all right, nice. You made that 7-yard completion, and then he took it for an additional 70 or so yards. I think you can say it's somewhat of a gift, but it makes sense, though, again, of what we're seeing of just taking care of business, not turning the ball over, and being efficient in the red zone. Tom, final thoughts to you on this game. Again, it was an awesome game to watch. I'm hoping the crowd stuck around. I know you kind of did your call out to the university. No, it doesn't feel like, that's unfortunate. We got to work on that one, too. Final thoughts on this one being there live and direct and just everything afterwards, sort of dissecting, letting it simmer for a bit.
Well, to be honest with you, I want to talk a little bit more about the Queen side of things and that Queen's offense. Like I mentioned, Alex Vreeken, when he's on, he can be that top tier quarterback. It's just finding that consistency, and I don't know what that is. Maybe it's finding him easier throws, or maybe it's getting him on the run, or whatever that is. Obviously, Coach Nez is a much smarter man than I am, so I trust him fully in this. But now, on the day, 30 for 49, 396 yards, 3 touchdowns, albeit the 1 interception. But like that against one of the best defenses in Laurier is still an incredible stat line as well. And I know that you and I have kind of gone back and forth about, I don't know how well this Queens receiving core is. Seeing them in person, yeah, these guys are legit. Cedric Smith, 8 catches for 93 yards. Jack Ashby Jacobs, Preston Martin, with one of the more impressive catches that I saw on the day, completely covered up and still able to come down with the ball to get Queens into first down or red zone territory was amazing. Mateo Tuioti, you and I have said this before. I think he's got to get the ball more often. I think just getting that guy into space, just if for no other reason, just have him be a big target, have him use that big frame, box out somebody, and just continue to catch the ball down the field. But I mean, Russell Weir, when he touches the ball, he's dangerous. He's on the kick return side as well. So I'm done doubting this Queens receiving core. They are legit, and they looked really impressive to me.
And whether there was ever doubt about the totality of it, I think it was always like, do you have a major gamer? And whether that's still the case to be seen, it's like, well, that's just not how we play. Like you read it off. We have 4, 5, 6 guys deep that we can go, all of whom can be that leader for us. And arguably that makes it that much more difficult to plan for when I think this is what made that 2019 MAC team so deadly, when you had a guy in Andreas Duick who could just get it out to so many weapons that when you try to plan for them defensively, okay, we know they're going to air the ball out, but who exactly do we lock in on? One of the major differences between this team and that Yates Cup winning team is that this team also has a guy in Kasari, as you talked about, who they can hand the ball off to, and Ethan Dahl as well, and pick up a lot of production on the ground as well. And this defense, I mean, we talked about it. I mean, Justin Pace still ends up with 6.5 tackles. Yeah, Tayshawn evades him one or two times, but there's a couple where he's still able to just step up into that gap and just grab a leg, grab an ankle on, yeah, arguably the quickest guy in all of U Sports, which, yes, we talk about Justin Pace being the best linebacker in all of Canada, but that's not your ideal matchup for a guy like that. So the fact that he's still able to come up correct on some of those, chef's kiss. It's an amazing thing. Vanek, all those guys in the back end. Tom, final thoughts with this incredible game. I should have skipped last period on Friday and come with you.
You you really should have, because it was a hell of a game. It was a great atmosphere, and finally getting a chance to take a picture with the Queen superfan Peter Bierce. Oh, it was so awesome to get a chance to see him and speak to him in person, and to see everybody else after the game. I know that the Queen's faithful and the Queen's players were a little bit down when I saw them, but man, I hope they realize how good they are and that they are so close from making that jump and finally getting into that championship caliber team. There's still a long season ahead of them. They got to clean up some stuff and find that consistency, but do not sleep on the Gales, man. They are really good.
And they'll be taking their talents on the road to take on the U of T Varsity Blues. 4 o'clock start from Varsity Stadium on September the 13th. And Laurier, Tom, help me out here, because we talked about this a little bit a few weeks ago. I don't even remember if it was on the pod, but are listed as playing host to the Battle of Waterloo against the Waterloo Warriors. Yet in the notes, it says Warrior Field. So did they actually make the jump to go over to Waterloo for it? Is that official there? Like, have you heard anything about that?
That is official. They will be playing this game, the Battle of Waterloo, even though it is a home game for Laurier in Waterloo.
I don't know if we talked about this on the podcast, but may I just say, whether we did or not, big ups to Laurier for this maneuver.
Mm.
Look, this game, much like so many of these other big rivalry games, and we're about to talk about a big rivalry game very soon that we had, is about so much more than just who's hosting or whatnot. And so if Laurier right now with, and all the, the construction companies running a bit late and then doesn't let this go, whatever's going on there, if Waterloo is the place to host this game so we can have more people in the house to celebrate Kitchener-Waterloo football at this level, then the fact that Laurier, they didn't have to do this. They did not have to do this. And I hope they're still able to maybe say, hey, to, Waterloo sports information people, whoever it is, can we get some of our staff maybe working there a bit? Maybe can we get like a cut of the game a little bit? Like, those are conversations that I wouldn't be surprised if are happening. And I think they're totally right to at least inquire into that, given that they're giving up a home game for it. But big ups to Laurier, Coach Falls, and whoever's making that decision, recognizing that for the showcase that this is going to be, regardless of the outcome, regardless of what tiers that we think that these two clubs are in for Kitchener-Waterloo region football, to make sure that this is in the best possible venue to watch it from. Great job by them. Yeah, we already said Queens is on the road to take on U of T next week. Let's move into, funny enough, a game that was also taking place from Warrior Field, where the Carleton Ravens, coming off their bye, go into Waterloo and pick up a tightly contested matchup against the Waterloo Warriors. Final score in this one, Carleton 19, Waterloo 14. Tom, just quick news and notes off the top. We don't see, or pardon me, we see Nolan Caban as the guy in this one. Nick Orr, we saw him take the injury last week. Somewhat speculated, just for me and Dakota being there at the game and live and kind of just seeing how he was maneuvering around. It felt a little bit, we made the parallel to Guelph, where because you have such a capable backup in Caban for Waterloo and McRae with Guelph, that if your starting guy is hurt, but it's not like the end of the world, you might be in a better spot to go with your backup. Clearly, that's not quite the case here. And then beyond that, not only do we see no Orr, but we end up seeing Emmett Ward, 11 for 20, 164, touchdown and an interception. Also taking it 4 times for 39 yards. Obviously, a lot of stuff we have to talk about on the Carleton side of things. First time seeing them after that, just whatever you want to call it, of an opening game at home against U of T. From the starting standpoint here, we obviously talked about Quentin Springer seemingly not being with the team anymore. Them having to now go through this quarterback carousel right now, regardless of what you thought about either of these two guys here. That stinks for Waterloo being in this spot right now with their offense being so many question marks.
Yeah, certainly going into this game, there's a lot of question marks. Obviously, you named off Nick Orr not dressing or starting because he's dealing with an injury, whatever's happened to Quentin Springer. But to me, near the end of this game, certainly into the second half, I'm now getting excited for Waterloo because I think this kid in Emmett Ward is definitely going to be the future. Obviously, he's a first year quarterback. He was a pretty highly touted recruit that K-Mac, Bertoya, and Conway were all able to get to go to Waterloo. But I know you read off the stat lines there, and to anybody else, that seems pretty, whatever. But he showed that offense finally was able to move the ball somewhat consistently as soon as he got in there. Nolan Caban finished 5 for 13 for 37 yards in the air. He did take off and run with it. It says only the one time. I thought he did it more than that, but point is that the offense really wasn't doing a whole lot. Carleton went into this doing the exact same thing that I would have if I was that defensive coordinator, saying, okay, I'm going to load up against the run, and we'll see how good you are in stopping the pass in the back end here. And really didn't get a whole lot from Waterloo in this one from that standpoint. But as soon as Emmett Ward came in there, you saw a little bit more production from Evan Basiliga and the rest of that receiving core as well. So while this game obviously didn't go the way that they wanted to, I think if Emmett Ward can continue to get better and better and certainly get some more reps as that first year, we'll see what happens for the rest of this year. But I really like that Waterloo defense, man. Like, they are playing some great football, albeit there were times where Elijah Barnes and that offense is just purely struggling. But a big part of that is because of how well that Waterloo defense is playing.
And offenses struggling was very much the theme of this game. And I wanted to just throw it back to you to talk about what got you so excited about Waterloo defensively. And I don't mean to undermine what Ward did when he got in there. Vanderveen really liked how hard he was running against UofT, young guy in there. And I think when I double checked, second year, but first year really getting reps for them. And Anthony Miller, the 6th-year guy out of Brampton, God bless you, man, just doing your thing out there. It's just the point of it's now coming on 3 years now where they, in this post Trey Ford era where, they start with Caban of the two, and he looks good, and he's very much boomer bust, just airing it out when they still had Gordon Lamb for his last year, the year in which he broke the OUA receiving record in yards, I think it was, or receptions. I can't remember which, but he's very boomer bust. He's throwing a lot of yards, but throwing a lot of touchdowns. The year after that, it's very much the battle, and Orr wins it out, and Orr's looking really good, and there are these moments. And so then Orr comes out, and now it's Caban, but now it's Ward. So it's not to undersell the performances. Any of these guys, is just to say there's the number of times where you felt like, oh shoot, we figured this out, and then you add in thinking we got a guy in Quentin Springer who's really good. He's not there anymore. And, so that's just the part where I feel for them and the frustration of just figuring out your offensive identity. But very much to your point, yes, defensively against the team in Carleton, who I think many times just wasn't performing well offensively. Again, kind of thematic of this game, but a defense in Waterloo that was really effective, and the guys that we've come to expect from them, Omaseni and Bowen in that linebacking core. But let me hand it off to you, Tom, because you were obviously really excited to talk about what Waterloo and K-Mac were doing defensively.
Yeah, one of the big showcases to me about how good this defense is as a totality is that when you look at obviously what Waterloo was able to do in terms of limiting Carleton in that offense, and then you look at the stats and the box score, there's not one guy that sticks out going, oh my God, this person had an unbelievable game or whatever. Almosteni has 5 tackles. Arden Martinez has 5 tackles. Keyshawn Bowen 4.5 in the interception. This is just good, solid defense from top to bottom, and it's exactly what we've come to expect from K-Mac. He's raising the bar for this entire team, and you can see how well they seem to be responding to them and how well they are playing for him in this regard. At any given point, if Carleton has the ball, somebody's there to make initial contact. Even if they're not taking him down, they're slowing him up in some capacity. I love continuing to see the evolution of Keyshawn Bowen and how he's being utilized. In previous iterations, we've seen him blitzed off the edge a bunch, either getting quarterback pressures or sacks. This time they keep him back. He gets that big interception for them to flip the field. Like, the growth of what this defense is capable of doing here is really what's the most exciting to me. And even that Waterloo defensive line, Marcus Ola, and then Dominique Walker, and what they are able to do as well. Walker getting the lone sack on the day as well against Barnes. So this is just a solid defense that I think is going to continue to get better and better. And like you and I have spoken about with other teams, if that offense can find its groove and start scoring points or start moving the ball, that really opens up what you're able to do here. Maybe you can get a little bit more aggressive. You can send Keyshawn Bowen, Michael Omaseni, or anybody else off the edge to try to get some more pressures. And even if you give up a big play, it's all right. I have faith in my offense that they'll either be able to flip the field for me or score some touchdowns. So as this team continues to get better, and I think Emmett Ward is going to be the future of this Waterloo offense, we'll start to see them get a little bit better and better.
I'm with you. It's just tough because their schedule is frankly only getting harder and harder. On the Carleton side of things, offensively, the day for Elijah, not great. 20 for 34, 263, no touchdowns, two interceptions. Only carries it one time for 2 yards, and that's not spectacular either, just knowing what he can do there. But I do believe that when we see things like Keyshawn Reed go for 12 attempts for 87 yards in the touchdown, Joey Marcotte with three carries for 41, a big one of 21, Ethan Roca, 4 carries, only 14 yards, but a little more liveliness from that rushing attack. I do believe that has a lot to do with the run pass option, the dual threat nature of who Elijah is. And we saw it last year, the first time in years since really the Coach Samara era of with Nathan Walker and those guys, seeing that run game look formidable. Now, obviously, you want to have a bit more production than where I have it here. 144 on the ground against a team in Waterloo defensively. Yes, we like a lot of these things, but just still based on the projections of what we think for Carleton, you want that to get going a little bit more. But, again, I think that run game is buoyed by Elijah, regardless of the less than stellar day he had passing the ball. But when he did, Frederick Hatchie has that one really nice reception, 4 in total with 80 yards. Keegan Burnett's a name that we know wasn't really on our radar, nor was Nicholas Sirkotsi, both of whom getting 4 receptions there. Tristan Reddy kind of being buried down the list here a little bit. And we know that he, in terms of just sheer talent, is probably the one sort of at the peak. So frankly, for Carleton, I mean, look, you picked up the win, and that's all that matters in this one, because as we said, this was a quick possible snowball or slippery slope effect to getting like particularly ugly. And there's things I think you can build off to then be able to say, okay, we got the monkey off our back. We got that win, even if production wise at times we looked better in that week 1 opening affair. But Tom, we were messaging about it at one point, and just like with this game, with Schneider Cave going down. And I think you probably saw it live. I think it was happening when I was at the York UofT game. Talk about that one, because this is a kid who, along with a guy like Jake Henderson in their secondary, yes, they got L. James Agamuto back this year, who missed, I think, all of last year at corner for them, and that's great. But what Schneider Cave was doing for them last year, especially ball hawking it out there in the secondary, this could be a big blow for their defense, especially as we're saying, still trying to figure out that identity, but you got a couple guys in there, like your Chris Dupins and Xavier Malones, who can make plays. But now you've lost that. So we're really needing to see the sum become greater than its parts or whatever once you start to lose some of those parts. Maybe I'm mixed up on the metaphor there, but that's a huge loss for this team. Take us through that one from at least what we know.
Yeah, to be honest with you, from what I saw, from the brief clip that I saw, I'd be shocked if you saw Schneider Cave back this year. It looked like a pretty bad injury. They had to stop the game for a little while to get him off the field and cart it off. So that's a big blow to that defense for sure. But to see guys that we expect on this Carleton Raven defense play like how they do. You mentioned Chris Dupin, 3.5 total tackles, including a forced fumble and the fumble recovery on that. So great to see him back out in the field and doing his thing. Obviously, we talked about how impressive Xavier Malone looks here. I mean, you held Waterloo, who you knew was going to have some difficulties throwing the ball, certainly, or you planned against it, let's say. So you know that they're going to attempt to run the ball and to still keep them under. I think they finished with 101 rushing yards, despite knowing that that's exactly what they're going to be doing. I think says a lot to where this Carleton Raven defense has come from. Certainly, anything was going to be better than what we saw against U of T a couple of weeks ago, but to see like a complete flip like this and to be stingy on defense and not have gaping holes in the back end, it was just really nice to see them play a little bit closer to what we were expecting from them. Lots of things to clean up with that Ravens offense. I mean, you mentioned it. You read off the line for Elijah Barnes. We expect him to be playing a whole lot more. There's a reason why you had him pegged as one of the future OUA MVPs. So still needs to find his rhythm, still needs to find whatever groove that he needs. But I liked a lot of the improvements that we saw from this Carleton Raven defense.
Last thing I want to throw your way, because you were the one I think calling for this early on in the year and trying to see Waterloo get a bit of momentum, is how much they have now been leaning on Evan Basiliga in that passing attack. In that template of players we talk about with Tuioti, we talk about with Dankers and some of these big H-back tight end dudes, the 5 catches, 87 yards. And just in terms of the context across U Sports right now, you obviously have, and if you're not aware of this, it actually kind of blew my mind when I pulled it off. To no surprise, Tom, let's do a little Q&A right now, or a little quiz game right now. Who are the top 2 receivers in terms of receptions in all of U Sports right now?
That would be Chris Joseph and Jake Oseen.
That's a bingo. With 44 and 33 receptions apiece, which are major outlier numbers because you get Ethan Jordan, who's arguably the best receiver in the country, in third with 25 receptions. Noah Avery has 20, who we know is Ottawa's bell cow in that aspect there. But then you get into a major tie with a bunch of receivers with 15 catches, Basiliga being one of them. So just the way that they're using him as that just reliable safety blanket, I think is proving out. And it'll be interesting to see once teams seem to readjust for that change in the offensive scheme, because they didn't seem to come out with that approach week 1 as much as they've really turned to it last week against U of T, as you were highlighting, and then this one as well, how that might then open up for some of these other guys that, we've seen flashes from before, whether it's someone like, obviously Marcus Hogel had the touchdown. Ramel Samuel Slocum gets held off the stat sheet in here, but we like what he's done for them before. Tyler Tierney, we've seen had some production for them in years past. So with Basiliga becoming this sort of the epicenter of this Waterloo offense, it'll be fascinating to see how teams readjust to that, and then how Coach Conway sort of plays his next hand in response to that. That's been awesome. Great job by you on calling that out early on. Any thoughts on that, or just final thoughts on this matchup across the board on what was, probably the ugliest game we had across OUA, maybe not U Sports in general, but certainly in the OUA?
Well, it's really interesting because once again, especially now that you and I have both committed to start covering more and more of U Sports, you start to see trends across. And I remember, I know I made this joke, I think last week, but like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, whatever, when you and I were first kind of coming up into U Sports football, that like they were having the conversation of like, oh, the tight end position is dead. And like, it's now the spread offense. And that's exclusively what every team is doing. You saw NFL start to get into something similar, that not obviously getting completely away from the tight end, but certainly more in that spread look. Canadian football was completely that. And now we've seen this resurgence. And I think Western's always been Western, but seeing how well an H-back can fit into an offense in terms of blocking and coming out for the occasional pass, and now seeing some of these larger backs that are in there. Evan Basiliga is probably the best one in terms of just purely being utilized for his receiving skills as well, but you got big guys like Nathan Denkers, Mateo Tuioti, who are showcasing that the big man in the passing game is just as valuable, if not more valuable, in certain scenarios here. So I'm really excited to see where that kind of comes into play, and seeing a tight end set get back in here. I mean, 3-down football, like I've mentioned, it was always been spread offense for the longest time. And now we're seeing, I think, almost every team in the OUA, you pointed it out, going double tight end sets. Like, that's damn near unheard of. So it's a really interesting development in how this game is continuing on. It just makes all the sense in the world to me. But really excited to see Evan Basiliga and that continued growth there, and I expect him to continue being the number one target for whoever it is at quarterback for Waterloo.
And again, without diving into too much data to like fully substantiate our claims or prove them wrong one way or the other, I was talking with someone being at the York UofT game yesterday and started talking about my time at Guelph, and I was bringing up at one point talking about what we did offensively and how Alex Charette was a guy that we ran at H-back a lot. And Charette is tough as nails. He's a great blocker, but certainly leans more towards a receiver body. And obviously those H-backs, tight ends are, when you want to explain simply what do they do, it's like, well, you have to be tough enough, strong enough, like an offensive lineman, but, ideally agile enough, fleet of foot enough with good enough hands that if we get you a ball, that you can make something happen. And then also you see with, Laurier and Western of recent years and still currently with your Sandro Perinis, your Sebastian Parcelidis of those more true fullback types of being able to kind of say, yeah, we might throw you a ball every once in a while, but your job here is to run over a defensive end or a middle linebacker of some kind. So truly finding that perfect hybrid, maybe it just speaks to just the development of football in general and just like growing good football players as a whole. For all you young offensive linemen, though, don't you dare start dreaming of now being tight ends. Make your money as an offensive tackle, and come on, that's the one thing now I'm worried about is that we were already raising the alarm of growing good O-line, D-line talent in this country. Now they're all going to clamor to be that Y tight end, whatever you want to call them. Oh well. Waterloo, as we already mentioned, stays at home but kind of goes on the road. Battle of Waterloo is coming up next week. They're taking on the cross the street rival Laurier Golden Hawks. For the Carleton Ravens, they return home, but to a very unfriendly guest in the Western Mustangs, which is supremely unfortunate for them based on just, well, who knows? Who knows? Maybe it'll give them an opportunity to find themselves a little bit. But let's turn our attention to that game I was mentioning. I was in the house for the Battle of Toronto, the Red Blue Bowl, the Argo Cup, the Matt Deans Bowl, and gosh, Deansy, how you doing, man? Because you keep ending up on the wrong side of these ones because it's the York Lions in an overtime thriller at home, victorious over the UofT Varsity Blues. Final score, York 33, UofT 32. Tom, we have to start at the end and wind our way back through because this was a game that followed. We set up this week of saying you got an amazing slate of CanWest football on Friday night. And we saw an odd decision by the Manitoba Bisons when after marching the ball to score a touchdown, a would-be game-tying touchdown against Calgary to send it to overtime, opt for the two-point convert at home, mind you. Whatever you think happened on that play, at the end of the day, they don't convert. The Dinos get the win. UofT in this game, and a game they were controlling for most of the game, looking really strong. And there was many times where I was like, yeah, I like that, Coach Cook and Coach Kanich just saw the game kind of how I predicted it, thinking of those injuries for York and where they might be vulnerable and get into their guys over the middle, whatever. But again, they're in control for a lot of this game. York makes the push late to come back. They score the first one in the first overtime session, get the extra point. UofT responds and and Jake Oseen just can't reel in the would-be game-winning two-point convert, which, oh my gosh, hurts so much. I feel so badly for the kid, and I don't want to belabor the point. That's literally all I want to say about it. But why I want to start there beyond just it being this defining moment in this incredibly entertaining game of these rivals is that we're seeing in back-to-back nights in different conferences and different situations this choice by whether it's the head coach to the coordinator, whatever it is, of rolling the dice, riverboat gamblering it up, gamblering, sure, why not? I'm a teacher.
Words.
And going for the win. What's your read on this? We haven't really got to talk, you and I, about these decisions. Was talking with a few people at the UofT York game, both during the course of the game of being like, hey, did you see what happened from Manitoba last night? Kind of an interesting choice. Da, 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 da. Lo and behold, would the same choice be made in this game? And in both situations, it falling flat. Tom, what do you make of that call, generally speaking? Are there situations that warrant it? Obviously, if your kicker were to be hurt, then I understand that as like the most obvious case of it. But I believe Maya Turner was still healthy for the Bisons, and I'm very certain that Sam Hankey was still healthy for U of T. What do you make of that call, generally speaking? When are you more okay than others doing it? And again, beyond the actual result, because on the one hand, you can't blame U of T for going for it when it was right there for them. I don't know. What did you make of, we can maybe save the Manitoba one in more thorough discussion when we get to our U Sports around the league, but just this decision in general, I don't know. What's your feelings and thoughts about it all?
I mean, I've seen a lot of people I've seen a lot of people online talk about how dumb of a decision this was, or how could you be doing that, or whatever. All like, let's not forget, Jake Oseen was open. It was the exact same route that they had just done to score the first touchdown, and they knew with that quick little out route directly where Brody Clark would have been, that's where they wanted to capitalize on, and it was there. Like, if Oseen catches that ball, the mentality here flips immediately, being like, oh, what a heads up call, what a gutsy play, great job by Coach DA and Coach Kaniches and all of this stuff. And you're like, yes, you didn't come out with it on this side, and yes, that's heartbreaking, but like, can you blame a team that just lost in OT last week? Like, it's wanting to end something as quick as they could without whatever. Sure, there's a lot of people just, there's a lot of, it makes a lot of sense to just take the points and kick the extra point and continue going on into overtime. But like, the fact of the matter is, he was open, the throw was good. If he catches the ball, it's a completely different narrative. And something similar on the Manitoba side, because it was just a quick out again. I can't remember the receiver off the top of my head. Maybe you can for Manitoba. My guy, take one extra step to get into the end zone a little bit more, or to get just a little bit further down, and then suddenly we're not arguing, is this a catch, is it not, like, whatever. So yes, it's super easy to afterwards to say, oh, that, what a dumb call that was, you could have just kicked a field goal or an extra point and then sent us into another overtime. But like, if they're both open, they didn't execute. If they did execute, what, everybody's narrative changes.
Just firstly, I certainly agree that good decisions lead to bad outcomes and bad decisions lead to good outcomes, which is why judging the results when it's life in general, and especially in football and sports, because it becomes so darn like frustrating to the point of like just my general curiosity of the intellect of certain people when they just constantly say like, well, see, it was a bad call. I'm totally with you. I'm totally with you. It's just, it's so unfortunate in both cases. My curiosity is still, just to at least stick on the decision piece of it, is again, if your kicker's out, like if you know that's a bad beat, and I love how you were like, they went right back to that speed out right where Brody Clark would have been. And we'll talk about him not being there and the word we're hearing about his possible return, or frankly lack thereof, for this year. I don't mind it at all. To me, beyond the kicker part of me thinks if you're in a really hostile environment on the road or something like that, or had it been Manitoba going all the way to Calgary, you might say, hey, look, our backs against the wall. If this goes continuing to overtime, if it's a big crowd and all the noise or something, or had UBC been in that situation in a raucous against a raucous Husky crowd in Saskatchewan or whatever, maybe then as well I get it. But I don't know. I don't really understand. Again, so I'm not blaming the fact that ultimately we were just on the cusp of it being proven right because of the plays almost working out. In those situations, I just still don't really understand, other than of just saying, no, we go for it. We're an aggressive team and we're going to get this thing done. I'm not, and again, I say all that without really trying to judge it in the specific moment because each opportunity was so close. But I don't know. I don't know what necessitates it, unless that's just, maybe it's just too many people tuning in for Lions games, Detroit Lions games, that is, and seeing Dan Campbell and wanting to own that persona as well, of being like, no, I'm the guy who goes for it, or whatever. But I don't know if it doesn't reflect who you are throughout 4 quarters, then all of a sudden to do this in the overtime section of things, I'm curious about. And Manitoba's case, I'm forgetting the new head coach, but maybe it's part of like, hey, Coach Dobie's not there anymore, and I'm going to show that this is how we roll from now on. Whatever. Again, we can move past it because there was a lot of other great stuff we need to talk about in this game, but had to start there. Final thoughts on just this whole thing, and we'll talk about it a bit more when we do our U Sports around the league, just as far as like you as a coach, you as a coordinator, when you would choose to do this, or are you just perhaps a bit more like me of being like, just get it and live to play another series? I don't know.
Well, first off, I think you mentioned it a couple of times. Manitoba did travel to Calgary. It was
Oh,
hosted
it
in
was in
Calgary.
Calgary.
It was
Oh,
in Calgary.
shoot.
Yeah.
Okay. Late night Canada
Um,
West football had me all sorts of places that I don't mind that call as much, maybe, but you do have a all U Sports, all Canadian kicker as well. Anyways, my apologies. Thank you for correcting me.
yeah, no worry. Like, it's difficult because when you're going into this with a mentality of like, should we purely go for this or should we kick it? Yes, I think you should kick it. When you're going into this, and I can only really speak to the U of T side, UofT York side, because that's what I watched directly, knowing that this is going to be open again. Hey, we know that we've got an opportunity here to score 2 points, and it's going to be open because it was just open, and they don't have time to adjust. Versus, let's kick the extra point and then see what happens. To me, that's the right call. To me, I think they made the right call. I think they saw the opportunity, go after it, go get the ball. And once again, if Oseen catches it, we're having completely different conversation here. I know that yes, kick the extra points, and if that happens, they go into overtime. There's still no guarantee that they would win that game either. Like York was just drove the length of the field and looked really good in scoring and getting it in front in that setting here. So they were coming on a little bit more. I don't know. To me, that seemed like a good call because you know it was open. It was open. It was just an execution problem at the end of the day.
Well, let's dive into the 4 quarters that made up the bulk of what occurred from York Lions Stadium in this Matt Dean's Bowl that we had. And going into it, I think the biggest question mark that I had raised was about the health of York defensively. Now, on the offensive side of the ball, we did see Avante back in there. Seemed like maybe he was a little limited, had a couple nice plays in there, getting a handoff or two, 3 receptions. Nice to see him getting back in the swing of things again. With it being a calf injury, it's one of those things where that calf's almost certainly not going to be correct until the whole season's done. He's just going to have to be able to maintain it and whatnot. But with the defense already going into the year and just knowing that Peyton Ryder hadn't been in the game yet for them, hadn't been, whatever was going on there, knowing that a guy in Raekwon Lewis Gibbs in your defensive secondary, hadn't seen him, then losing Brody week 1. And the word I was getting, talking to some people around the York program, is that it's very unlikely we're seeing him back this year. From the sounds of it, it was a minor tear into that ACL, and he's obviously beyond just the time that's going to take. His focus is that it would take him outside the season, and he's got a major audition coming up in a few months as well. And so I think just the timeline of it all, of how long it would take him to recover to begin with, is probably keeping him out. And then also knowing that he's got, again, a big interview with the CFL coming up in a number of months, which stinks. And seeing him out of there was, to me, just was so exciting because of how we've seen UofT attack teams. And it was this question of saying, okay, if you're going to be that light in the middle, so to speak, Austin Daisy shown some nice things. I don't think he's as athletic as Peyton Ryder is, especially when we see him get into his coverage. Obviously, when you don't have Brody in there, you're sort of all Swiss Army knife guy who will chase down plays on the other side, who will fill gaps, who will make plays in the pass defense, all these sorts of things. That's a major vulnerability, and I felt like UofT did a good job attacking it. And all the while, the question then raised another question of how does that affect how Greg Knox is going to attack UofT, in knowing that when you don't have necessarily your full stable of dudes to throw at UofT offensively in terms of guys we'd otherwise want to send on a blitz, and the fact that might leave you vulnerable that much more for a Jake Oseen, who, again, despite how it all ended up with 13 catches for 201 yards and a touchdown, or a Chris Joseph, who gets 19 receptions, 181 and 2 touchdowns. That you're leaving a big vulnerability in the middle where you're already weakened. And Knox took a couple shots, and Barnett just so expertly. At times, you could see him just backpedaling a few more steps, knowing that I just got to let this guy get open. And there it is over the middle to one of those guys. That was to me the biggest thing of it. It made me feel good about the UofT pick, though in the grand scheme of it was, on the wrong side of it. Whatever. I don't feel bad about it. Of just how we've seen UofT move the ball, and with that weakness and thinking about how Knox might still try to attack, allowed for UofT to do what they did do offensively on the day, which again was spectacular against a York defense that is incredibly banged up.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the conversations that we've been having with folks, whether us starting this or people have talked to us about it, okay, your MVP on your Heck Crichton candidate is going to be Elijah Barr, or sorry, it's going to be Ethan Jordan, or it's going to be Evan Hillock. And then you start looking over and like, hey guys, Scott Barnett is 90 for 124, 72% completion, 1,272 yards passing, 8 touchdowns, and no picks. The next closest guy to him is Alex Vreekin with 937 yards passing, 7 touchdowns, and 2 picks. So this U of T team looks to be pretty outstanding, and that offense is legit. I I don't know, and this is the same kind of conversation, just as a quick sidebar, that we were having with potential Keegan Hall in this one. How many wins does U of T have to win as a team if Scott Barnett continues on this pace for him to be considered as that? Anyways, that's a question for a different time, or you can answer it after I'm finished. But I love this U of T offense. It's been 3 games now, and we've seen the same, maybe not quite the same as that Carleton game, but like a version of that in all 3 games. They're playing outstanding. Jake Oseen, yes, he has a few bad drops, including that last one, and my heart breaks for him. Even messaging with a few York fans being like, I wanted York to win, obviously, but I wanted that last play to be more so of a York defensive play rather than him just dropping the ball. My heart breaks for him, but he still finishes 13 catches for 201 yards, 1 touchdown. Chris Joseph, 19 catches, 181 and 2 touchdowns. Like, the 1-2 punch with these receivers and what Scott Barnett is doing is one of the best offenses in the country right now. And you can see it just purely on the numbers here. And the way that they're going about this, it's not by forcing the ball deep. And like you were saying, it's utilizing what they know of that defense. Here's a quick speed out on a Sam linebacker who's, we're going to see how well Kirill Niari can play rather than Brody Clark, or we're going to see, hey, Raekwon Lewis-Gibbs is out. Let's start to see what we can do with that position as well. Like, they're taking advantage of certain key areas here, and they're just taking what's given and then allowing outstanding athletes to make their moves and to get going here. So I loved what I've seen from this. And then Jack Nyro's 125 on the ground for him as well, and getting a U of T run game. Man, this is an exciting offense to be a part of. It's just, this team very, very really, not even like could be, should be 3-0 right now.
Which, I mean, if we're going to have any kind of conversation about the Scott Barnett MVP candidacy, that's going to be the thing that is that's just lacking. And, we'll look at their schedule ahead briefly, but it's not getting any nicer for them especially next week, what they have coming their way. One of the major things I saw differently, though, and you brought this up in talking about the day Nyros had, was when we go back to that Waterloo game. And I think they showed the recipe for how you can try to slow down U of T, which is just saying, we're going to empty out the box. Like, we're just going to come downhill on any catches. And yes, you might still get the completions. The percentage might be nice because, it's more of these dump off passes, which we see week in, week out, are not givens. Like, even when you have a guy coming open over the middle, still trying to hit him in stride and anticipate whether he's going to be, maybe slowing it down into if it's in a zone defense and he has to kind of hit the brakes into like that sort of soft spot, or if it's man and he's running through, like, those are difficult passes to state the least. So I don't mean to undersell that, but Waterloo showing, hey, let's blanket it and let's force them to have to get something going in the box. And in that game, it was Barnett taking off, I think it was at least 14 times, which, we had this conversation with Taylor Algersma for years. And, again, for everyone in the Laurier area, all right, like, relax, okay? Like, I'm making a point here about the way that you have to manage quarterbacks in trying to protect them, but also recognizing that sometimes the thing that they do that makes you go, no, 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 okay, he's okay, is also what makes them the best version of themselves. The same way that for years I joke with Coach Galloway, Coach Falls, of being like, "Oh man, what a great game by Taylor!" But did he have to drop his like throwing shoulder into that guy? He could have easily stepped out of bounds or slid. Did he have to take off on that one? Could he not have gotten the check down or what have you? And them consistently saying, "But if you don't let him do that, you just don't get Taylor at his best." And Scott's starting to show a bit of that, though he only carries it 5 times, 43 yards. There was one where he is lowering his right shoulder into a guy. And I'm like, come on, man, what are you doing? But I say all that to say that they bounced back and being able to say, we're going to have to establish a run game at some point. We're just getting way too much tape on them. And they got a Queens team that I'm very interested to see how Beckmanis attacks them, especially knowing that Queens can get home with just 4 guys as well, but that they're handing the ball off to Nyros. And yes, the output there is tremendous, but at a certain point, you have to balance this out with some kind of a rushing attack. And I'm just so happy they were able to get it, giving it off to Nyros versus Barnett taking it too many times, because I just don't know how tenable that is over the long span of this long OUA season, though we're already approaching darn near the midway point of it. Don't think about that too much, Tom. I don't want to see you start crying on camera. But let's contrast it with the day that Keegan Hall had, because as you mentioned, we're going into this year and thinking about who those guys are who might be taking home an MVP and then in contention for a heck. And Keegan going 27 for 39, 330, 41 on long, a touchdown, no interceptions. He sets a pretty high standard. He sets a pretty high bar for him to try and reach week in, week out. And that's a nice day, and it's good enough. He gets the win, and he marches the field late to, again, tie it up and then set them up to then take the lead in overtime and hang on to it. With how injured that defense is, he's still going to have to do better. I know that sounds ridiculous looking at those numbers, and I just had the USports numbers in front of me in terms of what he's doing in the grand scheme of like all the great quarterbacks we have across USports. And there's reason to believe, we've talked about this for a few weeks, the way that York's running that offense, letting him be the maestro back there, set guys up. On the one hand, it stands to reason that it should get better. And if Avante is able to get healthier, I don't really believe he's going to get healthier. Going back to what I said earlier, you can manage it with a calf. I don't know. For them to really do the things that some people do believe that York could do, maybe touching that 5-3 record, or maybe getting an opportunity to host a playoff game or be competitive in a first round game, even if it's on the road, there's a certain level that Keegan's have to get to that we've seen from him for sure. So I don't think we're asking for him to do things that he can't do. But I think it's going to be on a level of consistency that is going to be, I don't want to call it a Herculean effort, though if there were an OUA Hercules, he's one of the guys that we'd be having in the mix for that. Just with all those injuries defensively, they're going to have to be outscoring teams this year to pick up wins. They were able to do on this one. It'll be interesting to see how they fare against a stronger. Well, again, UofT's looking so good. There are like these snap plays away from being undefeated on the season. But again, we obviously know that there's still a group of teams that are just waiting to get their shot at York, where York's going to have to outscore teams at this point, and that lies solely on Keegan.
I mean, yeah, there's been, if you want to make the argument of the what if scenario and everything, just as York, Toronto could be 3-0, York very really could be 0-3 at this point in time. Like, if not for a couple of questionable calls in the McMaster game, and even just an Oseen drop in this one, it could have happened here. So I have a lot of frustration with this York team because they should be so much better than what they are showing, at least in my eyes. I mean, Keegan Hall, you read off the numbers. He's also their leading rusher in this one, 8 attempts for 50 yards and the touchdown. I mean, we've seen Malcolm Salunga, we've seen Avante McCoy, Greg Seeley seemed to be doing some good stuff, especially in that MAC game, and he outrushes all of them. It literally feels like to get down the field to really do their thing, he is willing this offense to continuously keep going and doing whatever else. Zach Smith has a great game, 11 catches for 121 yards and a touchdown, but I have to assume, just purely looking on the film here, and once again, Coach Tommy Dennison is a much smarter offensive football mind than I am. I will absolutely, if I have an opinion that's different than his, you should probably take his over mine. But Avery Ford should be touching the ball so much more than he actively is right now. Every time he seems to be a ball thrown in his area, he's out jumping a DB and he's making a move. He finishes with 4 catches for 76 yards, but he just seems like an outstanding talent. So let's get him the ball in some way, shape, or form as best we can here. I just. Completely agree with you. If this team wants to go where they want to go, they need to be outscoring teams. I don't have a ton of faith in this York squad right now in order to continuously keep doing that because Keegan seems to be the one who absolutely has to get everything done. And especially in this offense, I get it. That is coming from him. He's calling out protections. He's calling out pass plays. He's doing all of it. But like, I need to see more from everybody else. And I'm not seeing more from everybody else.
It's going to be interesting, and I understand the frustration piece of it because of all that potential, all those pieces, and at no point in sort of putting this challenge forward to Keegan is it by any means of doubting him or doubting like if he just continues to put up days like he's done so far to say like are you in contention as an OUA All-Star, all those types of things. Was it a great year for you? For sure, but with all the hype built into him coming here, with all the success we saw them do last year with weaker quarterback play, that's where all this is coming from. At no point is it questioning them. The last thing I want to just bring up on the York side of things, and really the game in general, I'll let you comment or bring up anything else on your own accord, was the day of Jaden Dix that we were really excited to see what he could do in this game in specific, given the fact that it just seems to be so far. I think that's why I'm so excited to see what Queens' game plan is against UofT next week, of saying that like you're better off just trying to get home with fewer guys, playing coverage, and not letting a ball that's caught at 7 yards turn into 17 to 25 all of a sudden. You just get that momentum of the first downs and UofT going no huddle and all these types of things. And Jaden gets 7.5 tackles, 1.5 sacks, 3 breakups, and that's a hell of a game for him. He's got the length that seeing those breakups isn't terribly surprising, and we know he's got the skill that getting home 1.5 times is again is a good game. Like I'm not going to say that like we should expect him to get home 1.5 times every day, but I'm also not going to say that that's like wow, Jaden Dix really like blew up on this day. He did his part. Obviously, he did enough to, limit UofT in his own way to then give their team a chance to win. Love that game for number 5, and I think that can be he's going to have to be the equivalent of worse of us saying that leaning on Keegan offensively, and with just some of the injuries and what we're seeing. I think Jaden's going to be the guy that for this defense with how banged up that linebacking core is, where he's going to be the guy that has to have big games like this, and maybe the next iteration of it is the one of those sacks is stripping the ball and it's coming out. Like I'm excited to see what the full totality of his year turns out to become, but he did, I think, exactly what he needed to do on this day to give them the opportunity to stay in against a UofT passing attack that is just airing it out left, right, and center. So shout out to number 5 for his performance.
Yeah, I loved everything that I saw from him as well. I will say, once again, we start talking about trends across the OUA here. Starting to see a lot of teams as well go in that no huddle style of offense. Limits how many interactions or substitutions you have with your defense because you're just trying to hustle to the line. And there's a few times where you can see that York defensive line looks gassed, especially after a few plays here. And if Scott Burnett's been given time, if he's got a few seconds in the pocket, he's going to find one of these guys, and that's one of the reasons why they're doing as well as they are. So shout out to Jaden Dix for still doing his thing despite all of that. I mean, 7.5 tackles, 1.5 sacks, and 3 pass breakups is a fantastic stat line in itself. But certainly got to be aware of the fact that this team's going to go no huddle a fair bit, and you got to have the stamina to keep up with them.
Tom, final thoughts on this game as a whole from what you were seeing watching it live. One of the comments we got in the mailbag, and we'll address it a bit then, but was that, the televised product, especially in this one, wasn't ideal amongst comments about box scores and stuff like that. Again, we'll get into that more sort of generally when we get into the mailbag section. I had a great time being there live. It was a
Mhm.
full house, and sneaky with York being way out in the middle of nowhere. You ain't going nowhere. If you committed to go to that game, you're not going anywhere at halftime. So, you know what? Yeah, the subway goes up there right now, but you're sitting on a train for a long time to get downtown or anywhere, remotely more entertaining than where you had no shot at the, Steeles Kiel area where York University, where the campus is up there. But, if you're a student, it's not the most entertaining area. So, low key, kind of a sneak thing they have going for them there. But just from watching it, tuning in, just what we think of these teams. Final thoughts on this Red Blue Bowl Argo Cup battle, Toronto Matt Dean's Bowl.
I mean, at some point in time, not even at some point in time, the culture on this team continuously has to keep improving. Words tough for this U of T squad, and I'm hoping that they continue to see positive things happen within that locker room. I know that we know Coach Da, Coach Canisius, Jamie Cook, and the rest of that staff. We know that they're great at what they do here, but like purely as an offensive player, it'd be pretty easy to be pretty pissed off and saying, hey guys, we put up 700 yards of total offense here. And albeit, yeah, sure, we could have converted a little bit more, maybe gotten into the end zone here, but like 700 yards and we still lost this game. It'd be really easy to look back at that defense and being like, hey guys, like what's going on here? I don't think that that's what's happening. There's no indication of that whatsoever, but that's got to just be frustrating as all hell to be in that kind of a scenario here. So I'm hoping that this U of T squad can shore up a few things because they really should be 3-0 right now, if not for two heartbreaking overtime losses back to back here. So I'm hoping for nothing but the best for this U of T squad. And for York, man, you may be 2-1 right now, but you've got so much stuff to clean up if you really want to get to where you want to go. I am not convinced on this Lions squad that they are where we thought they could be as of yet. I got to see a whole lot more people continue to get a whole lot better because Keegan Hall is raising the bar for everybody on that offense right now. I need everybody else to step up.
And for U of T, they return home to take on the Queen's Golden Gales, which is a great matchup. I think it surprises some people like when we say that, but Queen's Toronto, just in
Mm.
terms of being 100 plus years old of a rivalry, whatever. I mean, all our OUA, U Sport football historians out there, give us something good to feed off of that. Little sneak preview there. They're really excited for that one. York gets the bye before staying at home to take on a Carleton Ravens team that might have their season on the line when they enter York Lions Stadium on September 20th. And for York as well, obviously getting healthy is the main concern for them. So the bye is probably totally get your point. The 2-1 could be 0-3. Totally get you. But at this point, they're like, hey guys, look. We're 2-1. We get the bye. We need to get healthy. We need to clean things up offensively, get the rhythm, and let's come back against the Carleton team that following week. In some regards, this could be a really good opportunity for them getting that bye. But let's finish off with pardon me, what am I talking about? We have two more games to go to, luckily. We go from we go all the way to Western Alumni Stadium, where the Ponies were taking on another stallion in the GGs, but it was the purple variety coming out on top. Western, hey, fellas. Job well done. Mission
Mm.
accomplished. Western 55, Ottawa 29. Tom, again, it's 2 weeks in a row we're seeing Western put up 28 points. I believe I have that correct in a second quarter affair. It's a team in Ottawa who I'm messaging you throughout this game, just going, I don't care what's going on. I am not less impressed by them right now because of what they're doing against the team that like Ottawa had their back against the wall from before the first whistle through to the last one. Anytime you're having to go into the house of the Mustangs and try to pick up a win, just like I know the score is lopsided, but I feel similarly coming out of this one different for important reasons, but similar to coming out of that Queens and Laurier one being like, you know what? We talked about Queens Laurier already, and Queens, you showed great things and you performed offensively, perhaps as well as you would want to. And I look at this Ottawa team and I say, we're still waiting for that Charles Asselin breakout game. And I mean, on the special team side of things, he certainly had his best return that he's had all season long. And just production there, but we're still waiting offensively. But when you look at just the day that Josh Jansen had and the supporting cast around him, like there's not a heck of a lot more you can really ask for. Avery gets held to perhaps his weakest output on the day, but he still pulls in six catches, and it opens up for a guy in Emile Gregoire having perhaps one of the highlight catches of the OUA season, and all these things, and Coolio, and they were missing Robin Lucier, or pardon me, Romeo Lucier, so they're down one of those key guys. But then we're seeing Tristan Gilbert Thibault really have his most effective game of the season for them. So like I'll start with that because we'll talk about Western, and this is where then Western fans always say like, oh, you don't talk about Western enough. It's like, well, how much do you want us to be able to say Western did Western things on this day? Yes, we'll talk about them, but I want to start with the Ottawa standpoint because we're actually in alignment with this, where there's a part of us, despite this loss, that thinks that when that USports top 10 comes out, Ottawa has a very strong case to make their way lower end of that, no doubt, but into that top 10 right now with what they've been showing. And despite this loss offensively, again, I don't know how much more you're asking for other than, but couldn't today have been the day that Asselin has the great game, or that like Avery has his best game that maybe keeps it that much closer? Sure. But then it comes back to that whole piece on why the teams that are consistently at the very top are there, because they also have their best games in the biggest moments. I'm not mad about this game from a Gigi's perspective. At all. I'm sure there's some things that we'll talk about that'll be like, oh, you know what, that wasn't great there. But offensively for the GGs against a Western defense that, yeah, we had some question marks about, but like is clearly showing they're extremely a very formidable team. Liked what we saw out of the Garnet and Gray.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, tough way to start the game with a great kick return and then an immediate score. So literally 2 plays, it's 7-0 already, but then the immediate response to go down the field and to score. And then you should have kicked it through, but you get the Rouge point and you're leading it at a certain point in the game. And I'm going, holy crap, like this Ottawa squad looks pretty good. And even despite all of the other stuff that happened with Western going off and scoring like they do, that Ottawa offense really did not seem to back down whatsoever, and I was really excited to kind of see that. You mentioned some of the numbers there for sure, but Josh Jansen, 31 for 42, 328 yards in the air, 4 touchdowns, albeit 1 interception, but like that's kind of where we're expecting Josh Jansen to be on a consistent level, or that's certainly near the top end of where we think he can be. I think a lot of this Ottawa GG's passing attack in particular here, and I think they showcased a lot of really great things. I cannot, and I don't want to jump over this game by any means, but like you mentioned, next week to play against Guelph, and we're starting to talk about, those top 4 teams that we've had in the OUA. Ottawa's making a real legitimate claim why they should be number 4 in that one and bumping another team out. So this is a squad that I think is really starting to impress me offensively, at least. Would like to see, like you mentioned, King Charles get a little bit more involved in that run game just in general. But, I mean, when you're running into the teeth of Max von Muhldorfer and the rest of that outstanding defense, that is a tall order, especially in this game. And I will say, he didn't have a great day, at least on the stat line, but Soren Hallschmidt lived in the backfield damn near this entire game, especially when he was on that against that left tackle for the Ottawa GGs. Man, he was eating his lunch money, getting into and just pressuring and getting hits on Josh Jansen or just disrupting things in the back end. So, credit to this Western defensive line. Every time you and I seem to come out to them being like, oh, I don't know, like, do they have a pass rusher or whatever else? They get somebody who's able to get back and at least pressure the quarterback pretty consistently here. But point still stands, this GG's offense, in particular, this GG's passing game, looks really impressive.
Well, and you mentioned the day that Soren Hallschmidt had, and again, this theme on like those key moments. And actually, firstly, you setting up the start of the game, very reminiscent of Carleton going to Western last year, and just from the jump, major special teams I mean, it was again, you don't want to say errors necessarily on one play on one side or the other, but major special team play for Western, putting them ahead of the eight ball and playing from behind. But then just like these things that great teams do, where midway through or really at the start of the second quarter, you get, the London native and Tommy Silcox coming up with a big interception. And like that, Western's converting that into a hillock to Seth Robertson touchdown. And then on the following play, you mentioned Soren Hallschmidt. He gets the forced fumble that Connor Franzisi recovers. And literally, next play, Western goes back-to-back offensive plays. Hillock to Robertson touchdown. Hillock to Robertson touchdown. Puts them up 21-8. And of course, again, as we were saying, Ottawa just battling back all game long. They make a decision late in the second quarter in terms of just taking the safety or going for the punt, I should say, when maybe they should take the safety. And again, we know when that whole spiel about playing the outcomes of it, should they have taken the safety and said, well, maybe not. All we know is that them punting it away, and I think it was Campanaro again with a big return, add a penalty on, sets Western up to be able to get another touchdown late in that game. I believe they scored late in that one before the end of the half. But either way, just these moments where from the very first play, Weston's coming up with a huge moment, and then these key plays defensively that they're capitalizing in right away, or the one special teams return play, the interception by Silcox, the fumble by Hallschmidt. It's just those things where, in just a this is kind of a nonsensical comment, but in like a straight up fight of like our guys, your guys, and like, well, we can do offensively and you can do offensively. It's like Ottawa did all they could, but just similar like Queens, you don't hate it when, a fumble on the day, not the end of the world, an interception on the day, two turnovers on the whole. I think I have that right. You can generally live with that. You can't live with that against these types of teams. And that's what had me so frustrated early in that game against Guelph, where, you're grabbing me and be like, hey, look, like you're still in control. Like Guelph's still moving the ball and all these types of things. But it's like, you're leaving the door open for this team. You can't give them anything. And frankly, Western did a much better job in this one on taking advantage of those moments early on and capitalizing it. But then again, I just come back to how great it was of Ottawa. Just, they didn't always punch back right away, but they were fighting through. And again, I love the day that Jansen had getting out to his weapons that made it so impressive. But just it comes back to this theme for these teams, that proven tier. This is what they can do to you. When you make those mistakes, they're going to turn it into a major, they're going to turn the molehill into the proverbial mountain.
Yeah, we talked about the jump ball moments in the Laurier game, and that's what Western does the best, is capitalizing on all of those jump ball moments, the conversions like you talked about. Here's a fumble recovery, immediate 7 points. Here's a great return, immediate 7 points. And that's why we had this adage. We said it last week, we'll say it this week, we'll say it probably till the end of time with how Western's been going. You don't beat the Mustangs with field goals. You beat them with 7 points, because that's how fast they can score, especially when their passing attack is operating as well as it is. I have to once again go back and I guess check if everything is correct here, but Evan Hillock only throwing the ball 16 times seems incorrect, but maybe it's right. I don't know. Anyways, his final stat line, 11 for 16, 208 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 1 interception. That's the touchdown rating is much more where we've seen him previously. I think the yardage could have gone a little bit more. Maybe it was just because we handed the ball off to Ethan Dolby 13 times for 182 yards and 3 touchdowns as well. So this is a Western squad, especially that offense, that is humming on all cylinders here. What I will say, I still have some hesitancy, I guess, or some question marks around that Western defense at times. They've got great players and great athletes across the board. Don't get me wrong. This is a Western squad. That's where they kind of live. But because you're that Western squad, the level of expectation needs to be a whole lot higher than where another team might be. I'll say if the special teams and the defense can play as well as the Western offense can, this is a Yates Cup, if not Vanier Cup caliber football team. At times, that Western offense for the past 3 games has started pretty slow and then hummed to life. And this defense at times has shown there's holes in it, or people are still able to gain a lot of yardage, and very much a bend but don't break. I mean, once again, this is a Western squad that's 3-0. So how much do I really want to nitpick? But because you're Western, I think that this defense is going to continue to get better. And if they can continue to play to the caliber of the offense, there's no reason why Western shouldn't be fighting for Yates Cups and getting into Vanier Cups.
One, as far as the defense goes, the biggest question mark was in that linebacking core, and they seem to have solidified the identity there. And it actually reflects, I think, something that we were talking about as a possibility that's come to life of whereas last year Jude Buchanan was the will to Riley McLeod's Mike linebacker. They've now, with the ascension of Elliot Blake as a linebacker type for them, let Buchanan control the middle there at Mike and let Elliot Blake cook at will. And it's another day of really strong production for him. 6.5 tackles and a sack to boot on the day. So a guy who's not necessarily built like a traditional linebacker is clearly showing that. And to your point, when you have guys like Von Muhldorfer and then, Franzisi and Hallschmidt as well on that D line to provide that support, you can get away being perhaps a little more undersized than you'd ideally like. But Buchanan's doing a terrific thing. And of course, Ethan Martin there at Sam linebacker is as good an option as you can have. And McKay was probably having one of his best days of his early career so far, flying around the ball, making some big tackles. And a couple of returns I think he had as well. So I'm totally with you as well. That linebacking core really finding the identity is, to me, I think, what's going to be really scary when all of a sudden, it's just now like the questions have been, whatever that upper echelon for this defense is to be determined still. But they've answered all the questions in terms of, okay, we know who our guys are seemingly. We kind of a sense of our rotations and who we want where. And now we just have to focus on gelling as a unit because, yes, there are a lot of new faces in this defense, but they've seemingly figured that out now. And so to me, it's only, onwards and upwards for this team in terms of what they're going to be able to do. Tom, we talked about the day that Ethan Dolby had as well. Jack Kelly, obviously not as explosive as what he did against Guelph. Only gets 6 carries for 31 yards in total. But we talked about it briefly, or I sort of threw it out after you highlighted Dolby's day and giving him our offensive player of the week, which was that early on, really was impressed by what the GGs were doing on that front line with them, and Daniel Briere in the linebacking core as well behind your Hildebrandt and your Prince on the front line. Early on, it felt strong. Is it just as simple? I mean, it's never simple, but we kind of had that suspicion going in that much like as we thought about the game as a whole, maybe early on Ottawa can hang in there. And as you alluded to, even taking a lead coming out of the first quarter, if memory serves. And then eventually it's just too much to handle. Because there were moments where, I mean, it's not surprising because Hildebrandt's one of the best D tackles in the province. That early on he's given some fits, but eventually Dolby's just going to get this production? Or did you feel that there were things that Western was doing differently? We did see Sebastian Seabold back for them in some choice moments, and I forget, it was on a power they ran. You could see Seabold going through the gap, which it just blows my mind that he's as big as he is in at guard. Like that's the type of guard you see at the CFL. You don't always see guys that size at guard with the height he has at the OUA level, which is redonkulous. But was it just that as simple, quote unquote, as we're going to keep like leaning on our game plan and eventually we'll break through for those big carries by Dolby? Or did you think that there were ways they were adjusting to how Ottawa was having a bit more success early on against them in the front?
It's difficult with a Western offense because there is just such a tendency of like, okay, the first time that we ran power, maybe that didn't work. Well, how about the second time? How about the third time? I guarantee you the 12th time we'll rip a big one. So yes, there is absolutely that level of we're just going to wear a team down at a certain point. But what Jackson Brashear and what Riley Hildebrandt were doing at the very beginning, I'm looking around going like, oh my goodness, like they are in the backfield. They're disrupting plays. They are playing pretty good football here. I don't think that it was necessarily a big offensive change. I think it's purely, like you mentioned, this we're going to stick to our game plan. We're going to be who we are in Western. And that's kind of just the mentality of this team. I mean, it just kind of harkens back to the same principle when I was down there for spring camp last season, and I'm talking to them like, hey guys, like you guys aren't doing like a scrimmage with anybody or anything else. And a bunch of the players just kind of looked over at me and they shrugged and went, we're probably not going to see much better competition from anywhere else in the OUA with outside of maybe Laurier. So like, why bother bringing somebody else in that we're going to potentially play down to? And that kind of speaks to the mentality of like, we are Western football. We are going to play our game offensively, at least. We're going to continue to run the ball. We're going to continue to do the things that have made us successful year after year, which is why in 99% of all of the games that Western has lost, it's offenses taking advantage in the first quarter, in the first half to get up on them, where now you're forcing a Western offense to get out of what their normal game plan is, and that's where there's opportunities there. So, but once again, scoring quickly against a Paul Gleason defense, yeah, easier said than done, because that's the side of the ball with Western where they are fluid as all hell and they will make changes as need be. I mean, you mentioned Elliot Blake. He comes in at will linebacker because they see a better opportunity with him there in that Queens game, and then they go, yeah, he's a pretty good will linebacker. Let's just keep him in there. Jude, you go to Mac. Ethan Martin at Sam's, one of the best ones that we have there. And even looking in the back end, you see how much Richard Adubafor is constantly moved around, playing corners and halves and whatever else based on what the need is for that team. So the formula for how to beat Western isn't complicated, but that doesn't mean it's not unbelievably difficult.
Yeah, I mean, all Frodo had to do was just walk to Mordor and drop the ring in the volcano. It didn't make it easy for him to do. Um, I hate to already jump to saying like last thing I want to throw out, but again, like there's not too much I want to talk about generally with this game. Western played a great game in Ottawa. I give them a lot of flowers for giving a competitive game at times and moving the ball offensively against the defense that's getting better and better. But here we are. Last thing I want to just bring up in the conversation about this for you to comment on or just take it into whatever final thoughts you have is that we were seeing like in Evan's time there for at quarterback, we go from his first year where it's that O line of Elliot Beamer, Phil Grahovic, a young Eric Anderson, Zach Fry, and just the stable of backs that just Trey Humes and a young Keon Edwards, soon to be MVP, and Winati still in there, and all these great guys that was very much we are run first. And that's what got them to that Vanier and got them lifting up that trophy in 2021 against Saskatchewan. We then see when they come against the roadblock of the Laval Rouge et Or in the semifinals the year after in London, that leads to Laval raising a Vanier Cup on London's field against those same Huskies. Man, Huskies, I'd love to see a win of Vanier this year. Let's go, Dogs. But we say, okay, look, like, they really need to open up the passing game a little bit more because that's where they were limited, to your point, when they got behind, when a team was able to say, we are going to try and slow down your run game as best we can. That, hey, look, we got to be able to throw a ball downfield that doesn't involve a fake handoff into the belly of our running back to be able to open it up. And then we see last year, or sorry, I guess I'm still 2 years behind, but we see in the last 2 years getting a lot of creativity offense and on offense to the point where we're speaking glowingly week in, week out about like, oh my gosh, Coach Richard now has these wrinkles he's putting in with the run game and the reads for Evan off the run game, all these types of things. So far, 3-0. So at the end of the day, it's like, well, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But they've seemed, kind of to your point, like, oh, well, you don't like power on the first one? Well, how about, X, Y, and Z? Well, they very much stuck to the script of just like, this looks like a Western football team indiscernible from so many that we've seen. I'm curious when the top's going to come off a little bit more, and not just taking the top off in terms of some of those deep strikes down the field, because we've seen a couple of them. They had a couple of nice ones in the Guelph game last week as well. But where a bit more of that Coach Gaynor Richard creativity that we saw last year be really effective for them, because it's all well and good to say you're at 3-0 and the day that Dolby had and the defense looking like it's starting to solidify with those pieces that left and these new young guys coming in and the transfers, this, that, and the third, or what have you. But it's because we've seen so much tape of Western playing at that next level in the semifinals in those Vaniers, where we know that unless their rushing attack is like that 2021 year, that rushing attack was, as good as it's looked for them in maybe since like that 2017 year, arguably the best Western team, whatever. What's that wrinkle you want to see with this Western offense? It's all great. They're at 3-0. It's all great. They're scoring points. The defense is getting better. But I think, and I'm sure people in that Western locker room are still saying, we've yet to reach the best version of ourselves offensively. And I'm curious what direction that's going to take, because we've seen Coach Richard mix it up in a number of ways during at least just thinking of Evan's tenure there at quarterback.
I think no matter what with a Western squad, you're always going to have a priority on the run game. As long as Coach G Marsh is there on the sidelines, he's going to be pushing, hey, let's get a run game going. And with Ethan Dobie and Jack Kelly, I think that you found your two guys who can really get that done. To me, the wrinkle that I would love to see get explored a little bit more is continuing in that passing game. I mean, we know what happened in previous years, how dynamic Evan can be with Seth Robertson and the rest of his guys. How well is a guy like a Dasani McIntosh or any one of those other receivers really going to incorporate into this? Haven't really seen Roman Campanero as much as I thought that we would in that receiving core as well. I mean, love to see Braden Masseri go off. I mean, he's 3 catches for 75 yards in this one, leading in that category. But I think that this passing attack, while we know what they're capable of, I want to see that explode. We have not seen that explode as of yet, which is crazy because they've been putting up the amount of points that they've been putting up pretty consistently here. But we know that this is a Western team that's built for the long haul. It's not a team that's going to be starting off real strong and then fizzling out near the end of the year. So I think that they are just going to continue to get better and better as things go. And that passing attack will find its own. But I mean, when you can get 200 on the ground, 300 on the ground last game, there's not a whole lot of pressure in order to get that done. The last thing that I'll say, I know we mentioned it earlier, so awesome to see our guy Sebastian Sebald back on that offensive line. He was only in there for about a half, which I believe the commentators were saying that at the beginning of the game as well, just to slowly get him back integrated into this. And certainly some cobwebs to shake off, I'm sure, but I mean, when you've got a guy like Braden Hitchens, who's going to be your sixth offensive lineman potentially, and he's playing right now well enough to be considered as an OUA All-Star, this is just a wild time. I know Western offensive line, they're always good, but man, when you see it in person, holy crap, these guys are good.
There was one power they ran with Sebald where he got his hands on Briere and like threw him 4 yards back, which arguably was less effective than if he just like stuck on him. Because I mean, it was a run that bust for I think 20 plus, and Briere ends up kind of getting in on the play, but almost arguably it's like Sebastian, like you blocked him too well in a strange turn of events. Yeah, it's stupid how good they are up front, and they're gonna be taking on the Carleton Ravens on the road next week, see how this offense travels. And as for Ottawa, they're staying on the road, take on the Guelph Griffins in a game that, if not if not the game I'm most excited for next week, it's tied for number one, maybe with that Queens Toronto game, because with what we're seeing from Ottawa and a Guelph team we're about to talk about, as you mentioned, we talked about those top four starting off the year, and then Ottawa being that something to prove. What they're starting to prove this year, don't worry about the record, don't worry about this game against Western, is that, and we'll see how it fares out next week, that they might be in that situation where they're also saying, hey, look, we've proven a lot of stuff over the last couple years as well. Maybe we're in the prove it territory as well. Who knows? We'll talk about that one when we set up week 4, but let's finish up the week 3 schedule with a little trip down to the end of 401 under the shadows of the Golden Arches. And boy, oh boy, did those Golden Arches look good on the broadcast. A little place known as Little Arkansas, Little Rock, Arkansas, I should say. The team with the bluest of blue collars, the goldest of gold swaggers. Under the tutelage of the Don J.P. Cercelli, the Windsor Lancers held host to the Guelph Griffins and fell 31-17, a game in which they opened up to a firing start, going up 14-0, that you're messaging me being like, well, now it's my time to complain. Why did I not pick Windsor? With getting the opening touchdown and then getting a pick six to boot. But Guelph battled back, and more than anything, Tom, seeing Donovan Malloy back there was just such a reassuring thing. And we talked about it a little bit. We'll get into it on the course of this conversation. Did they maybe, I'm curious what his timeline was. Like, if you truth serumed them of saying, hey, when did you genuinely want him back? Was it for this week? Maybe they were holding him back one more week because at times it felt like, he maybe wasn't playing a full game the same way that you talked about with Sebald for Western. But the extra contributions from that young man, the pride of Hamilton, Ontario, run the ball for them, was just such an uplifting moment for this Guelph team. What was your take on this game? Unfortunately, a flat tire kept you from getting out to the
Ugh.
game, but you were locked in whistle to whistle on this one from home. Obviously, was your key takeaways under the lights from Alumni Field in Wind City, Ontario?
Well, first and foremost, I was so frustrated when sorry, let's put things into perspective here because once again, we are positive people first and foremost here. So I am unbelievably grateful at the fact that I made the trip down to Kingston and came back on that Friday night and had no issues. I woke up on Saturday morning to a completely flat tire and was thinking, oh, like this is fine. I'll get things fixed up. It should be totally fine, whatever. And then come in and say, no, there's a bunch of stuff that we got to fix up here. And it's a Saturday. I can't get access to anything. You got to wait till. So very, very frustrating. I'm sorry, Windsor faithful. I was so looking forward to coming down to this game myself, but I promise I will make the effort. I'll find some time. I got to get down there for a game. But we're starting to see some similarities between previous Windsor teams and in this one here as well. Some new faces in certain areas and Kareem Cotton going off. It was so nice to see 6 catches, 128 yards and a touchdown himself. But I don't know what else needs to kind of happen for Nick Domovsky here. I get this is only his second game this season. I get that, there's a lot of things that can still go on, but last year in certain areas, even despite the fact that he didn't play a whole ton because he was injured, he came back at times. And against your Guelph Griffins last year, looked really solid and was doing a lot of really great things. And you go into this one, and yes, he finishes 20 for 36, 326 yards, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions. I think you're with me in this one saying that this was not nearly his best game or not nearly what we've come to kind of expect from him in terms of that play style. And even anytime that Guelph goes down the Windsor, you're super scared about what a rushing attack could be like. But Guelph holds them to 39 yards of total rushing. So, as much as this was frustrating watching this for the Guelph side of things and being like, what the hell's happening here, guys, get this thing going. At the end of the day, like, that defense seemed to be playing pretty well.
Well, and yeah, no, 100%. And, it's a bit of the both of like what does Windsor need to do better offensively and the things that Guelph did and beyond just having a good day. Finally, a game where across the board, seeing a couple just individuals really stand out. Like I'm tired of being like, well, Guelph's just really solid. They're looking really good. It's like you get the 132 and 2 touchdowns out of Donovan Malloy, which you desperately needed. And we were talking beforehand. I don't know if the numbers with Isaiah Smith are correct. He obviously had the major gain of 63 for the touchdown late in the game. But like, did he not get the ball? Uh, uh, Earlier in the game, I don't remember that happening. But put all that aside, because we're talking about the defense. Anakin, don't call me Skywalker Guthrie. Turn it over the 2 times. We've talked about Nicholas Metron on our radar from the second that he called out week 2 against Western being the thing he was most looking forward to. He's flying all over the ball, 11 and a half tackles. Javon Jacobson, who we've talked about going back to last year and just needing to see him healthy, and the 8 tackles, the 1 sack, and also being like a physical SOB and getting these guys' faces, which is exactly the dang thing that is one to see of who's that guy for them that's going to mix it up. And going back to the commentary beforehand of like why this was such a scary matchup is a team that's going to put their fingers in your face mask and try to get on your nerves in Windsor. I thought was the like antithesis of what we'd seen from Guelph so far this year. But they stepped up to the challenge and being physical on defense and getting those major plays from Guthrie in the secondary and from Malloy on the offense to be able to say like, yeah, guys, sometimes we've highlighted it with the 2 matchups that Laurier and Western have gone through. Like what makes them great is that they can play strong 4 quarters of football, but sprinkled in there are those major plays that have the other team going, gosh, now we got to worry about that. Eh? Oh, we were holding our own decently, and then they pop off for that one. And then this guy just lays the boom that has the momentum switching one way or the other. Really happy seeing those things on defense for them against a team in Windsor who, again, we're still trying to figure out that identity, but has the pieces in play that I think we know enough about them to say you can take pride in what you did in this game against Windsor 100%. Still not seeing number 21, though, in Liam Talbot for this team, though, for Windsor. I know I kind of took it from the Windsor conversation to Guelph and back to Windsor. I apologize. I'm throwing a number of things at you, but you handle it all so effectively every week when I always do it to you. To me, that's the thing that's still missing. It's the thing that connects their air game to the ground game, gives them another great rusher. I mean, Mambo only getting 10 carries to begin with is somewhat of an interesting development. And yes, you don't have Christopher John and Joey Zorn to be able to hand it off to as well. But that's just an interesting choice in terms of their identity, especially in a game where, like we talked about it with Queens, where, hey, Kasari only, like, what was it, 8 carries? That's a little bit odd, but you're playing from behind a lot. It makes sense in that standpoint. This is a team in Windsor where we've, again, you pointed out already, loved what we've seen from Kareem Cotton so far in his first season for them. Colby Ginn's been really solid for them as well, and Domofsky we know has the potential to be really good, but you just wonder, especially in a game where you're not behind, playing from behind, and frankly you're playing with a lead for a bit, just why there wasn't more effort made to just run the ball, which has been what their identity's been for the last years. Maybe that's evidence that it's changed. Maybe it's evidence of something that Guelph was doing. I just find that a little bit strange. Not to be super judgmental of them in terms of their offensive attack, but just why they didn't try a bit more on the ground. And maybe the numbers are wrong. Maybe it's as simple as that. But that struck me as well. I know I throw a lot out there, Tom, but yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I'm right there with you on the run game though. I mean, to see even Andrew Delaney only getting 3 carries here for 14 yards. We saw Mumbo and Delaney really do some great stuff against Laurier, despite gaps not being there for them to run through and then bouncing things out and being able to get something done from that standpoint. So to not see them be a little bit more committed to the run was a little surprising. Certainly, you're up 14-0 in the first quarter here. That seems like a great time to be running the ball, although you could also come at it from another angle. Well, they're down right now. Let's continue to lay it on, whatever. But a little surprised not to see them commit a little bit more to the run. The one thing that I will say is that Windsor offensive line is huge. They're big boys up there, but there's a lot of fast defensive ends and defensive linemen now in the league, and just having that stereotypical like monsters on that offensive line. If you're not able to move as well, I don't know how well that's going to be coming up to you. And I don't want to call out that O line, and Coach Beardy is fantastic at what he does, but this is 2 games in a row, albeit yes, it's against Laurier and Guelph, but 2 games in a row where your run lanes really have not been there yet. And you've got 2 fantastic running backs, even from what we've seen so far. So I want to see that come to fruition a little bit more, because the best way to keep Domofsky from getting too much pressure on him is, hey man, don't worry about it. Hand the ball off a few times, watch them get a few first downs, and then we'll get you into the passing game when they're super concerned about the run. So that's where I'd really like to see this Windsor offense get a little bit better, as in that run game in particular. I think you'll help out all facets here. But even despite that, like we mentioned, Kareem Cotton having a great game. Evan Martin, 7 catches for 73 yards himself. Delaney getting it done in the air as well with a couple and 36 yards. So they're obviously committing to being dynamic in that setting with the receivers and with the passing game, but really want to see, it's Windsor football, man, especially in the era of the Dawn. This is ground and pound, out physical teams. Let's run the ball.
totally agree. Now, this Guelph team offensively, we were so worried coming into it, just the health status of Tristan Aboud. Goes 15 for 24, 231, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. And of course, it's an interception that young Dylan Simpson takes back to the house early, getting us behind 14-0. Scary stuff. He carries it 7 times. It shows -19. Put all that aside. In terms of just Tristan Aboud question of it all, from us seeing him go down, and as we've talked about a bit, both in the context of that game and then juxtaposing it with Waterloo and how they're rotating injured quarterbacks with competent backup quarterback play and this, that, and the third. I definitely didn't look like it's a Tristan Aboud at full health. Looked maybe a little bit tentative. It's a lower body injury he was dealing with. I think it was a calf.
Mm-hmm.
I like this performance from him, though, a little bit beat up. And obviously, when you have the run game working so as effectively as it was, you can live with that. But let's talk about the offense 3 weeks into it, because we're throwing all the flowers at what UofT's done, and rightfully so. And here sits a Guelph team where it's I mean, it's the weirdest thing where, in terms of the actual yardage they're getting on a per game basis, they're sitting like 20 yards and change behind what U of T's doing this year. Guelph right there at the top, yet their scoring is much more in the middle of the pack section. So on the one hand, it's still that optimism of saying, hey, look, you're moving the ball effectively. Go back to last week. They moved the ball effectively at the start of the game. But finishing those drives in the end zone is a little bit of what seems to be hampering them on offense. What is that distinction for you between a team that clearly has, the talent to move the ball up and down the field, seemingly whomever is in at quarterback with them, getting healthier in the backfield, and Malloy being back, I think also helps Smith out quite a bit. And don't know Sargent's timeline. I think that much more so when he's back as well. And a receiving core that we're still not fully trusting yet. And Willem Arsenault, again, don't know what his status was, but really, I haven't checked the participation, but really not a factor in this one at all. But clearly they can move the ball, but it's so far the trouble has been finishing in the end zone. How do you sort of square that circle, whether it's as it pertains to the specific Guelph team or just thinking about, hey, Tom, there's an offense, doesn't matter what team it is or what level, they can move the ball like heck, but they don't score as much as you would think would kind of track with that production. What do you make of that piece for this offense where on the one hand, there's a lot to be bullish about, but then there's a lot to still be left wanting?
To me, I've kind of gone back and forth on this a fair bit, and I will confirm Arsenal was not dressed in this game.
Gotcha.
So that's why you don't see him there. But I've decided I'm going to call out those Guelph Griffin receivers. Because when you think about this, when you just purely think about defensive strategies and everything else, certainly they're going to be a little bit more spread out as you're on the field going down. There's a lot more field to cover and everything. As soon as you get into the red zone, yes, I know that there's still 20-yard end zones and that's still a lot of area to cover, but you start to see things shrink down from a defense. They start really focusing on getting the run. You get a few more guys in the box. So then you have to throw the ball. And the great receivers, what they're doing to get open in those settings is route running. You see that consistently here. I mean, in the overtime win against Queens, we see Seth Robertson score a touchdown purely based on his route running capabilities in that setting. That's, to me, where this team has the greatest area of growth is with those Guelph receivers. I know Harry Vardy goes off, 7 catches, 103 yards and a touchdown. That's a great day for sure. But once again, we are seeing consistently here, Tristan Aboud, even with an offensive line that's starting a second-year offensive lineman in Riley Brackenberry in place of a all-Canadian caliber lineman in Mitch Schretchinger, you see Tristan Aboud back there with 3, 4, 5 seconds of time not being able to find anybody. And to me, that's route running, that's capabilities on the front end. How hard are you working to get back to the ball? I think that's your biggest area. And once again, you move into those red zone capabilities or the red zone areas, you need route runners, you need receivers that are going to be fighting guys like Robert Springer and the rest of that great defensive secondary. And I just don't think that we've seen that in the first few games for Guelph.
No, I'm in total alignment with you. And again, yeah, that's even, I think, taking into consideration the Willem Arsenault injury, because these are the things that I think you and I were a bit slower to accept based on the words of wisdom of somebody who called it out like right from the jump in that Laurier game, of a much more finely tuned eye to the ins and outs of receiver play that we're now catching up on. And I mean, it's Kane Stevenson, Vashon Genesis. Those are tough names to lose, but I mean, so were Keandre Smith, so were Clark Barnes, so were Kean Schaefer Baker. And I mean, at a certain point, there's maybe something said of just, yeah, like you had an incredible receiving class or a couple of receiving classes, and maybe that pool's running a little bit dry. I think the talent is still there, especially when Arsenault is in there. I think ultimately what this is lending itself to, and it's kind of unfortunate because I think Aboud has the talent on his own, or I should say has the talent that if you have like to be able to be like a pass for the star in a pass first offense. I think
Hmm.
he's shown the talent, and obviously we know they're giving him the pro. But I think what we're seeing with this one is that with that, I mean, the receiving core got less healthy this week or less formidable without Arsenault in, and the rushing attack got stronger. And what did we see in the end of it is that, well, they pick up their first win, and it's with Malloy coming back and having that strong performance on the ground. So I think that's ultimately, I guess, where that identity is going to have to start to then let Aboud kind of work off of that. I think he has all the talent to be able to say you could build outside in to begin with and lightening up that box to then hand it off. I think just the proof of what we're seeing in the early returns of the season is that they're going to have to start on the ground behind that O-line. That, yes, Schlesinger out, and I don't know if you got word of what the status is of just like what the injury is. I'll pass it back to you. And with that running back core getting healthier, I think you just have to accept, look, we came close against the champs in the week 1 outing. We let up, or we passed up on some early opportunities against one of the best there is in Western the week before. We got our first win. Let's get healthier. Let's get the run game going, and let's build outward from that. It's still like, again, the sky's not falling. They needed to get this win, though it wasn't easy, but it's just looking more and more like that's what the identity is going to be offensively. And I think Aboud, I don't want it to sound like it's saying like, well, it's going to waste Aboud by having him like, hand the ball off like 30, 35 times, and then he's going to be limited because only 24 attempts for Aboud is on the lighter side of, I think, what you could just put into his hands. But this is how they picked up the win, and at the end of that's all that matters. But run game makes us think offensive line, as you already alluded to it. Mitchell Schlesinger, all Canadian caliber type guy we saw get hurt against Western. What is the status of the young man?
He has a high ankle sprain, is what I've been told. So that's an annoying one that'll keep you out for at least a couple of weeks. Because the only way to really rehab that is just to stay off of it and get as much rest as you can here. So I anticipate that he'll be gone out of the lineup for the next 2 or 3 weeks or so. But thankfully, it's not anything more serious. You should get him back in crunch time when you really need him, which is a great thing for this for this Guelph team.
Okay, happy to hear it's not year ending. The last thing, Tom, I want to throw you away on this one, and again, we can talk about any number of things, but the last thing that, whether or not we're happier with the defense on this one than we've had in weeks past, and obviously just by virtue of Windsor, comparing Windsor to Western and Laurier, it's the weakest offense that defense has had to handle. It's not a shot. That's the clear reality of the fact of who they've had to go up against. And that run game coming alive with Malloy coming back. The thing that still raises concerns, and I get it when you give a pick six, you're going to get the ball right back. So I'm actually going to, not even add the caveat I was almost going to, is to say this Guelph team needs to learn how to score in the first half. Like, I know they get that touchdown to shorten it up, and they get right before the half. I mean, doggone it. I mean, Anakin Guthrie has that incredible, I think it was the punt return touchdown. He takes the house that's brought back for the block in the back or whatever it was. He gets a touchdown called back. I forget exactly how that broke down at the end of the half. So almost closer in that regard. But in the same way that we're going to talk about, all right, Western, we got to start seeing these things for you to get to where you are. Like, we like the baseline that you've established, and Guelph showing that they can clearly move the ball, and they've shown that, yeah, they'll score points, and the defense needs to clean some stuff up. But there is something to be said about like when you get behind, as we talk about with Western, as we talk about in all these games, how that sometimes forces your hand to play a certain way versus being more in control of saying whole playbook is open. Whether it's about this team in specific or just football generally speaking, like, is there a quality to a team? Is there a certain like play style? Like, what is it for you when we're seeing 3 weeks in of like Guelph really struggling to put up points in the first half, even though they move the ball well, and then they end up in the second half scoring more of the points? Because I do think that's a huge limiting factor for them if that's gonna continue as a trend, and I think that's gonna very much set a lower ceiling than we thought for what this team could do if that continues.
To me, this is more so defensively going up against different defenses, and especially in the first few weeks of the season here, throwing different wrinkles at this Guelph Griffin squad that they weren't necessarily expecting going into this. Maybe they watched a bunch of game film on a bunch of these teams and then saw something completely different when it came time. But to me, once again, the mark of a great coaching staff is the adjustments that you make in halftime. And each time, even on the losses that they've had, Guelph has come out much stronger in the second half in all three of these games. And this time, obviously, we're really able to get things done and get the win with this. But you saw it against, I mean, the best example is Laurier. Obviously, you weren't really sure what you were going to see, or maybe there were some other wrinkles, whatever. Like, they returned damn near everybody on that defense. I don't know how different it could be, but you make your changes, you make your adjustments, and then you put up 21 unanswered points in the third quarter alone against that squad. So this is a team that I think, as the season goes on, as you start getting more and more film on teams, because remember, like you and I have been in week one, you're watching last year's game film, trying to understand, okay, I think this guy's back, this guy's back. They have a couple of new recruits in here. Week two, week three, you still really have not seen the vast majority of what you're able to do, well, unless you're playing against the 2014 Guelph Griffins in the first game of the season, where you see a 40, a 30, a 50-man front, a 7-man front, a saw blitz, everything under the sun from Coach K-Mac. But for the most part, you don't see everything in there. And as teams continue to put more and more game film out, you can better prepare for things. And you know as well as I do how intensely Coach Mike prepares for all of those defensive fronts, the blitz packages, what their tendencies are on first and second down. Like, all of that's broken down. With more information, more data, you'll see this Griffin offense get better and better as things go on. But ultimately here, there's a number of times in every game, regardless if it's the first game of the season or the national championship, where you got to have somebody go up and make a play. And starting to see that from the defense. Metron goes off. God, it's so nice to see Javon Jacobson doing his thing here as well. 8 tackles and a sack for these guys, looking really good at that linebacker spot as well. Want to continue seeing the growth of this Griffin offense. It looks like Donovan Malloy is that, with the 2 touchdowns in his immediate return. Isaiah Smith, I still think, has a ton of potential, and I think if he remembers at times how big he is and how strong he is, he can just start running dudes over when he gets the ball. Need to see something from that receiving core.
Yeah. I mean, I think I texted you at some point late in the night. I think I was coming off of dozing off in the midst of just the marathon of football that we were, just given by the football gods. Of there were a few times though where I made a comment towards you, being like, "All right, Smith running angry," which was nice to see as a change. For this Windsor team, they're staying at home to take on your McMaster Marauders, a game in which one of them is going to pick up their first win in. And I'm really interested to actually break that one down in the week 4 preview with how they've been looking so far. And Guelph returns home to take on Ottawa Gigi's team that, kind of to connect to a mailbag question that I know we'll talk about in a little bit, is going to be a very, kind of especially as we get into the midpoint season of the year, a very informative game in terms of sort of what these teams are shaping up to be and how the end of the OUA season and the standings as a whole may break down on. Tom, I apologize. I don't know if I asked if you had any last thoughts on this game one way or the other. You're looking good there. Amazing. Tom, that wraps up week 3 in the OUA, but it certainly doesn't wrap up our coverage for the podcast, because we're now going to take you around the league looking at the 3 other USports conferences and the games that made this week what it was. And again, apologies to the folks with Laval and Sherbrooke. I know that game's going on, and with 1:20 left in the first quarter, Laval's up 7-0. Hey, frankly, good job, Sherbrooke. Yeah. Tom, going into this weekend, what was the game you were most excited for? And coming out of this weekend, what's the game you want to talk about the most?
Well, I think we had a couple of spots that we were highlighting here. For me, once again, I'm getting sucked into Can West, and I'm going to Can West. I'll be catching a game this upcoming week here. But it had to be UBC versus Saskatchewan, the 2 teams that were undefeated in the Can West, and both teams looking really solid. And I am really interested in that one. But the game that I have to talk about is St. Mary's slapping Bishops 33-7 in a final in a rematch of the Loney Bowl. My goodness, that was not on my bingo card for what I was expecting for this week.
No, total agreement. I mean, let's talk about it for a little bit, because I think the commentary we had in highlighting that game, I was in lockstep with you with UBC at Sask, and I mean, just go check out, if you don't go rewatch that whole game, because Sask really took it to UBC. At least watch a bit to see just how they packed the house. They had the fireworks going off at the end of the game. Like, my gosh, the Sask team just feels like that, man. So obviously it's great seeing an OUA team lift up a Vanier. I'd love to see these Huskies pull through on this one. But like with the St. Mary's Bishops rematch, obviously, as you said, it's as simple as it's the Loney Bowl rematch. But what made this game so formidable last year was the fact that, I mean, both teams touted unbelievable defenses. And for St. Mary's, that really what gave them the ability to upset St. FX and nearly upset Bishops. But then to come out in this game against the Bishops defense that from our preseason analysis looked to be returning. They had a few question marks on defense, but a lot of the same kind of core guys back there. And for St. Mary's to put up the 33 on them, to me, that's remarkable. I wouldn't have been surprised. Like, I would have still thought it the upset had we come out of this one and it was like a, I don't know, like 15-10 final, right? And St. Mary's gets a big play here or something, but it's the defense that comes out. Their defense clearly still did their job, but for them putting up that 33, to me, that was just the thing that, again, with us trying to do a little more justice for the other conferences is now having me rethink a little bit of like how I think about that AUS. We know it's that top three with these two and then St. FX, and I want to talk about the X-Men in a moment, but yeah, like offensively for St. Mary's with Shipley, this was impressive.
Oh my gosh, yeah. When you look at even just the flow of the game, I mean, Bishops doesn't get a single touchdown until the fourth quarter with 7 minutes left. This was a dominating performance. Justin Shibley, 19 for 28, 239 yards, two touchdowns, and albeit two interceptions. But once again, you speak to how impressive that St. Mary's defense was last year. It sounds like they are picking up right where they left off and just limiting what Bishops is able to do. I mean, somehow, some way, Bishop still ends up with 406 yards of total offense. You want to talk about a bend but don't break mentality here. That's really where that comes into play. And the sacks and the interception, like this is a St. Mary's defense that really looks strong and is why they could very well be back in that Loney Bowl.
One, and we'll get to the mailbag shortly, and I know people were highlighting some of the issues with box scores and things of this nature, and I'm already dubious of just calling this out because I think I've spotted an error. But if you just look at the drive summary for Bishops, it's turnover, 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 safety, turnover, turnover, touchdown in the second half. That's where I'm like, okay, so in the second quarter, clearly that's where something's wrong there. But you go into the third quarter, turnover, turnover, like, so something's clearly messed up here with those score, with the box score keeping there. But one way or the other, St. Mary's defensively looking strong as they were last year. And I mean, Justin Quirion, as we talked about, is a guy that is going to be in the conversation along with Silas Fagnon, and maybe we're having to throw out the name of Shibley as well as the kind of core contenders for that AUS MVP. So great job, Tom, in highlighting this one. I do want to give a quick shout out to what Silas Fagnon and his St. FX boys were doing, opening up their home schedule in Antigonish against Mount Allison. And as we were saying, again, kind of framing it as being like, yeah, we loved what St. Mary's did last year and getting to the final, but with this retooled, I shouldn't even say retooled because it's the same tools. They're just back in the, full health with Malcolm Bussey back. But it really felt like with what Bishop showed last year, St. FX being healthy, it's really their conference to lose. I don't fully believe that anymore with what St. Mary's showed, but knowing that for Bishops, you had a hard competition in St. Mary's, and knowing that your rival in St. FX was getting an easier day hosting Mount Allison, and Fagnon goes 22 for 33, 286, touchdown, one interception. Again, it should be no worse than that and only better. Bussey 11 carries for 69 yards. Fogarty really a bit limited there as well, but then in the receiving core, Zachary Hood with 6 receptions for 100 yards, and Ben Harrington with the 4 receptions and the touchdown. Just again, just a day that, from my following it to the best I could, is like St. FX doing exactly what they should have against an opponent like Mount Allison, coming into their house, and just really happy with the state of the AUS right now, because those games have been exciting, and I don't have it in front of me, but I can't wait now till we get our, the St. Mary's St. FX matchup and St. FX and Bishops. It's going to be a heck of a game. Any other points around USports, Tom, that we wanted to talk about? I know we did talk about Manitoba Calgary, a bit. Do we want to talk about anything else from that game beyond the finish, or do we want to rehash the finish a little bit? Obviously, a Dinos team that's frankly really impressing us from perhaps what we thought going into this year so far. What else across U Sports do we want to maybe make note of?
Well, so once again, keeping my eyes on the Canada West, there's a lot of conversations that people can get into in terms of who they think the best conference is across the country. Obviously, the RCQ with having Montreal and Laval constantly being in the Vanier Cup or winning them, that's a strong contender. The OUA, obviously, we're biased in that one. But the one thing that Can West, the thing that they continuously keep talking about, is that there is no bad team out there. I went into this being like, man, I am so excited for this Manitoba squad. Jackson Tuchinski, Braden Stubbs, all of these guys who are coming back. This is a squad that's now 0-2. And a Calgary squad that's got half fourth years and half first years is looking pretty strong and taking Regina into overtime in the previous week and obviously picking up their first win this time. Saskatchewan looking unbelievable. Anton Ammonrood, 25 for 37, 418 yards, 4 touchdowns. And this is the big difference from last year and the previous years to this year: zero interceptions. We talked about how important it was that now the new offensive coordinator who's back in there and how great he was as a quarterback, and now how he's helping this quarterback out and just cutting the field in half and saying, look at your 3-man game, look at your 2-man game. You don't have to get to your third, fourth, fifth reads. If it's there, throw it. If it's not, take off and run with it. And then supplementing that with, here's Riker Frank at playing some of his best football, and a defense led by Seth Hundaby that looks fantastic as well. Regina, Alberta, like, this is the more and more I get invested in Can West football, the more and more you and I keep talking about, like, hey man, like, should we just dedicate an entire podcast to Can West here? Like, this looks pretty outstanding. It's so much football for us to watch, but still, this is great.
No, it's been terrific. And yeah, Can West and both Can West and the UAA West really stealing our attention. Not again in Laval and Sherbrooke, we know they're still duking it out right now. Can't finish that without giving the major shout out to Concordia for picking up the big comeback win against McGill. A McGill team that so far obviously has come up short in the win column, but came in with all the pomp and circumstance with ELR and just being this guy who, you obviously think of Desjardins number one, and then with thinking about Montreal having to kind of change their identity a little bit. And then maybe ELR can kind of take, what can he do with a McGill team and all these things. Xavier Tremblay with his Concordia Stingers, hell of a game picking up that win for them. Just a terrific time to be a U Sports football fan, Tom. I'm checking my notes, Tom. I think the only thing left is to dive into the mailbag, but final thoughts across U Sports. Anything else you wanted to get across before we dive into the questions and comments from the people?
I know there's a lot of folks who are disappointed with the OUA TV streams and the quality and everything else that's happening there. If you still want to invest in great Canadian football and get a chance to see it at its very best, go pay for a Canada West TV subscription. They play most of their games in CFL stadiums, and it looks like they get access to all of the camera work. I see the overhead camera for the Calgary Dino games that you see for the Stamps games, to see the production quality there, to see the quality of commentators that are there. This is what our ideal scenario for U Sports streaming looks like. And to top it all off, it's some of the best football in Canada pretty consistently here. I am so sold on Canada West TV. You gotta just pay for it. I promise you it's worth it.
100%. And on the topic of the broadcasts and everything like that, and turning to the mailbag, first question, I won't read out sort of everything in here, but ultimately just a call for a continued spotlight on the feeling of wanting we're left with OUA scores, stats, and .tv. This individual goes on to talk a little bit about the Toronto York game in terms of just the caliber of the game in general and being an entertaining ball game. And so, again, I think that's probably where they were tuned into with the York stream, which again has been brought up of having some challenges so far in the season, as we've alluded to, and going through some of the box scores to complement our notes and watching the games that sometimes we're left a little confused as to whether it's purely reflected. I'm not too certain how much more I want to say on it because I don't know. I understand this person just saying that, like, until it gets better, like, well, we can't just let it slide that it's not there yet. We're acknowledging it here. I'm not trying to, you know, feed a fed horse, so to speak, on the matter. But I don't know. Anything else you want to add on to this? I know we've talked about it for quite a bit going back to the preseason now.
Well, what I want to say, and I want to give a huge shout out to the Waterloo streams and like the quality on that, and the obvious new upgrades and the new emphasis that they have put on a top quality stream is fantastic. And getting to see Adam McGuire continue to do his thing, but the camera work and everything else. The one thing that I do want to say, and this is a message to all of the OUA streams out there. Some of them are much better than others, certainly, but while yes, the quality of the cameras and those shots, like they need to be of a certain level for sure. If you have a choice between investing in a top tier camera or a top tier person to follow the ball, please choose the follow the ball. I will take a lesser stream that I can watch the ball, watch the play at any given point, rather than a top quality stream that gets focused in on the ground and we miss big plays or big runs or something along those lines. So please, folks, please invest in camera operators who can follow the ball. And I know a lot of these folks, like we got walked through when we were speaking with Coach Chris Marshall, how expensive OUA streaming can be, and the idea of, you're paying $40 for a season, that's $1 a game. Like, it's great quality and great whatever. Not if I can't actually watch the game and watch the ball. So please invest in whatever you have to so that we can just see the ball at every given time.
Windsor had a little bit of difficulty with it. And I bring that up for no other reason than to say that we didn't shout out our dude and Brett Hedges
One of
rocking
the
the
best.
solo call. Possibly was going to be a two-man call if Tom didn't run over whatever shrapnel you hit coming back from
Ah,
Kingston. But again, whether we were totally satisfied with the camera work, we know that the person who is, creating the theater of the mind, if you will, filling in what you ideally are seeing as well in Mr. Hedges is top tier. And as always, Brett, we love the shout out. Thank you so much. Couple other questions here. One regarding one is a two-part question. Number one, how far can York go? And two, how close are the GGs from disrupting the top four of Western, Queens, Laurier, and Guelph? Tom, just quickly to address the second one, because we've already talked about it. I think we feel like they're right there. And I think just seeing them go to Guelph next week is going to give us a ton of information on it. I don't know if you really want to add too much else onto that beyond just maybe addressing the first part of the question of how far York can go.
excuse me. On the Ottawa side, exactly like you said, we think the world of Ottawa. I think they've really impressed us so far. We're really going to see what they're capable of this week going into Guelph, because if they are going to move into that top four, the one team that they would be moving out, in my opinion, would be Guelph. So to actually see them play against each other right away, this is going to be great for that. York, I think I've already shared some pretty strong feelings on what I thought about the current team and how things are going. You get a bye week and then play against Carleton, and there's a good chance, depending on if Carleton can continue to get better or whatever else, that you could be 3-1 and then have to play Queens, Waterloo, Western, and Guelph. You want to be 3-1 going into that. You really, really do. So I think right now a 4-4 finish is very doable. It's very manageable. Um, I I don't know about a 5-3. Could potentially be a 5-3, certainly. I need to see more from this York squad. I'm so frustrated every time I've watched them, at least in the past couple of games. I need to see more from them before I'm really willing to say that yes, they're going to finish 5-3 and host a playoff game.
I don't think I can add too much more onto that. I do think, as we said, they're getting the bye at a very good point for them right now to sort of get a little more gelling offensively, get a little more healthy. Last question we have regarding Queens. This individual, we're talking about their matchups they've had with Laurier over the last couple of years, including this year, and addressing how that Queens seems to have a habit of coming out strong and then perhaps in the second half things falling apart a little bit, almost like the inverse of what we were saying with Guelph, if you will. And they're ultimately just wondering about how does something like this happen consistently, and what can their coaching staff do to remedy this? Is it an overall culture concern, a pure Jimmy's and Joe's things? Shout out to this individual for using the Jimmy's and Joe's, or just a nightmare matchup from top to bottom for the Gales matchup specifically against Laurier. I mean, for my money, just quickly, in terms of just like, as they're saying, happening regularly. We love the outing that they gave Laurier in the semis last year. And frankly, I don't remember Queens even really having a strong much at all in the regular season matchup last year against Laurier. And then this one again, just one where you're playing a strong game. You're just slightly just outdueled by a team that's just that much better. Do you have more to add on to this person's the specificity of them asking about Queens being a team that can come out strong and then maybe it fizzles out? Obviously, the Western game is perhaps evidence to that, or maybe it's more of an outlier. What do you make of the question we have about Queens against Laurier perhaps starting strong and not finishing?
Well, this is the thing, and you talk about how good coaching staffs are because they go into the halftime and they make adjustments and that. The people who are at a disadvantage when it comes to that are the people who are up at halftime. So when Queens starts strong, what's your mentality when you go into halftime? Hey, keep doing what we're doing. We're doing all the right things, whatever else. And then, especially against Western this year, like we've detailed it, let's move somebody who wasn't even starting for us into a starting role at the will linebacker. Let's change up how we're doing our defense. Maybe offensively, we tried this. Let's get into this, or let's clean some stuff up, whatever. So when you're coming back into that game plan with the exact same thing because it's been working and rightfully so, and then you have another team that's got the capabilities of a Western or a Laurier that's able to make adjustments and say, this is what we want to do differently. You don't get that big 15-minute break anywhere else in this at this game. So it's not like you can just sit down on the sidelines and in the 2 or 3 minutes that you have before you go back out onto the field, okay, we're going to completely revamp how we're doing things. We're going to start this person here. Like, it's just not possible from that standpoint. So in that setting, you can almost have where if you start really strong against a quality team, that can almost hurt you in a certain space. But I think it's not, in my mind, it's not that Queens is lacking. It's the other teams are just that good. And I don't think that Queens is a bad squad or that they have bad coaches. I think they've got some of the best across the country, both in players and coaches here. There's just something a little bit more. And it's hard to quantify what it takes in order to make that jump to be a championship caliber team.
Those jump ball moments, and this week was riddled with them. Tom, the mailbag is empty. The OUA and around the league is covered. Final words on a fantastic weekend. Again, apologies to our Laval and Sherbrooke friends out there still duking it out right now. I'll pull up maybe a score update there. But final thoughts on what was a remarkably entertaining week of USport football.
Exactly like you said, this was another phenomenal weekend of USports football. I encourage all of you, once again, get out to as many games as you can, and especially, my goodness, get out to Kingston. That city was rocking. That stadium was rocking, at least in the first half. I loved every second of that game. I was so happy that I made the drive, even despite the fact that I got home at like 1:30 or 2 in the morning or whatever it was. I would happily do it again. I would have gone to Windsor if I actually could have. So loved everything that I saw. Encourage you to get out and see as many games as you can in person. Man, this is just a phenomenal time for USports football.
And with about halfway through the second quarter, Laval 7, Sherbrooke 3. Upset alert? Probably not. But hey, good job by Sherbrooke staying in it early. That, Tom, is a wrap for us. It feels weird going through an OUA weekend where you and I aren't at any games together. And though we'll talk about it on the Week 4 preview. Week 4 preview. I can't believe that's what comes out next. We aren't going to be any games together next weekend either. but that's so okay, because as long as there's OUA and USport football, our bond is as strong as it ever will be, Tom. So I can't wait to be setting up week 4 with you later on this week, right here at the 55.